Among my many frontline relics, I cherish a letter of commendation from the Supreme Commander-in-Chief for excellent fighting in the battles to liberate the city of Budapest. When I look at it, I see again the trenched fields between the Tisza and the Danube. Our 244th Separate Anti-Tank Fighter Division fought heavy battles on the outskirts of the city of Kartsag. The enemy concentrated here large tank forces. The soldiers of the division steadfastly repelled frantic tank counterattack. At dawn on October 8, the division commander, Captain Skorobogatov, was summoned to the NP commander of the 375th Infantry Division. Intelligence data confirmed the upcoming counterattack of enemy tanks. Be on guard, Major General Karpukin pointed out. The morning fog had barely cleared as enemy tanks appeared. They went along the highway Kartsag, Pishpekladan to the trenches of our infantrymen, to the firing positions of the 2nd Battery, commanded by Lieutenant Radzivilyuk. The clanking of tracks and the rumble of engines merged into an ominous rumble. Having let the Hitlerites at a close distance, the battery opened fire. A cruel, bloody battle began. The gun crews of Senior Sergeant Markin and Sergeant Cheekin showed exceptional courage and firmness. 3 hit tanks were left in front of the battery position. We also suffered losses. The battery commander, Lieutenant Radzivilyuk, was killed. The gun commander, Senior Sergeant Markin, was wounded. The battery lost 3 guns. Distinguished soldiers, including posthumously Lieutenant N. Radzivilyuk, were awarded government decorations. Dusk came, the cannonade subsided. We were gathered by the division commander. This silence is not good. It is necessary by morning to complete the units with personnel, material and ammunition. As the Chief of Artillery Supply of the division, I'm in great demand. To go to the divisional artillery depot, I figured, will not have time. The commander was also well aware of this and, looking at me questioningly, waited for me to propose a way out of the city. I proposed to arm the 2nd Battery with trophy 75mm anti-tank guns, which we had captured from the Nazis the day before along with the ammunition depot. Good, said Captain Skorobogatov. During the night, the battery was rearmed with 4 captured guns and 550 shells to them. As expected, by morning the fascists undertook a new tank counterattack. Our artillerymen did not falter. They managed to fulfill the main tank, to blunt the tip of the enemy tank wedge. The enemy did not pass. Infantrymen praised. Well done, guys, from fascist boats. On fascist tanks. Not easy, but glorious battle path passed on the Hungarian land anti-tank division of Captain Skorobogatov. In the beginning of January 1945, when Hitlerites made a new attempt to break through to the Budapest cauldron, where there were about 188,000 enemy soldiers and officers, our artillery fighters showed high courage and skill. A quarter of a century later, the officers' roads led me again to the places of former battles. I visited many cities of the revived Hungary. It was a joy to see that where once there were brutal battles, blossomed a new happy life of the Hungarian people. I was also on Mount Gelert, towering above the beautiful Budapest. On this sacred place, the grateful Hungarian people erected a majestic monument, a monument in honor of the Soviet soldiers' liberators. The names of those who valiantly fought for Budapest and died a brave death are carved in granite. There are many of them. You read the names with excitement, and it seems that the eyes of your brave compatriots, sparkling with love for the motherland and thirst for exploit, are silently looking at you. Among them are heroes of the Soviet Union officers Buntovsky and Azamoyan, petty officers of the Soviet Guard Ibragimov and Polyakov, who took the baptism of fire in the fall of the formidable 41st year near Moscow, and soldiers Gavura and Zadoroshny, who reached Budapest. I put a bouquet of scarlet carnations on the cold-polished granite and think, no heroes do not die. They live and will always live in the hearts of those who today protect the conquests of socialism with weapons in their hands. They live in the hearts of the Hungarian people, for the freedom and happiness of which the most precious thing, life, was. Our division, after heavy offensive and defensive fighting on the west bank of the River Gran near Komano, was withdrawn to the 2nd Echelon of the 7th Guards Army. Here it put itself in order, received replenishment, and prepared for a new offensive on the Rona-Bratislava direction. A huge organizational, political, and educational work was done to mobilize the personnel for the upcoming tasks. So in March 7, there was a meeting of the party activists of the division. where the report on the vanguard role of the communists in the last battles and the tasks of the party organizations in the upcoming offensive of the division was made by the division commander Major General Vasily Karpukin. In the units and subdivisions were held party and Komsomol and Red Army meetings, talks with the personnel, seminars, briefings, party leaders, Komsomol leaders, agitators and deputy commanders on the political part of regiments and battalions, checks the condition and knowledge of the material part of weapons, the availability of ammunition and the readiness of economic and medical units. March 8 was held a solemn meeting of all the girls of the division, attended by 84 people. 15 girls were awarded. The same meetings were held in the regiments. Divisional newspaper in defense of the motherland, on March 8, issued a special issue dedicated to this holiday. Here are some notes from this issue. Frontline friends. Anxious were then days. The enemy was advancing. When the German machine gunners occupied the outskirts of the village, in the sanctuary were still a few wounded soldiers. Maria Klesheva and Elena Sergeyeva continued to work. They carefully washed the wounds, put bandages. "Shall we stay?" whispered a Red Army soldier, wounded in both legs. Maria came to him, knelt down and answered, "No, we will not stay. Let's leave." The wounded man pointed to her bandaged legs and, after a moment's silence, said, "You, of course, will go away." It was painful to hear this. Marina, excited, stood up and turned to the wounded. "Soldiers, you've become despondent, and for nothing. Now the wagons will come and we'll all leave. Lena and I won't leave you alone. If we're going to die, we'll die together. That's what she and I decided." Someone quietly remarked, "You're good relatives." The girls kept their word. They carried all the wounded over the crossing, and when the soldiers were put in cars to send to the rear, they warmly shook hands with Marina and Elena and called them front friends, heroines. B. Sanarota brought a wounded officer. He was bleeding thinly. Immediate blood transfusion could save the warrior's life. Elena Ivanovna Sergeyeva offered her blood and saved the commander's life. So wrote Guards Lieutenant Shmotriakov about patriots, officers, order bearers Maria Ivanovna Klesheva and Elena Ivanovna Sergeyeva. Another note published in the same issue. I have abridged it somewhat. Patriot of the motherland. His silence was replaced by the rumble of guns. Tatiana Petrova heard even the crackle of machine gun bursts. She pressed the telephone receiver firmly to her ear and, "What is it?" The distant point is silent. The liaison officer quickly reported to the commander. An order followed. Private Kozhin, Sergeant Ovechkin and Sergeant Gordeev, for 15-20 minutes found the end of the broken wire and restored communication. "The line is fixed," he reported the communicator to the commander. When on duty, telephonist Petrova, communication works smoothly. She gives no mercy to a chat lover. She is trusted more than anyone else. They rely on her. She will not fail. More than once, the communicator under enemy fire courageously provided communication to the commander. A modest girl, with a kind and strong character, she won fame. She was awarded the Medal for Combat Merits. Petrova grew up in the war, and in 1943 she was still a pupil of 10 class, dreamed of becoming a teacher or a doctor. But Tatiana went to the front. Instead of algebra, she diligently studied the technique of communication and began to work well not only on domestic, but also on trophy devices. Shane Svizistka Shankovich violated discipline. Petrova, at the next Komsomol meeting, criticized the behavior of Shankovich. "There are a lot of remarks about you," Petrova said to her friend. "You are distracted during duty. My mother is an old woman. My father was killed by the Germans. 2 brothers shed blood for the motherland. How can you be calm? Thousands of our girls are taking revenge on the enemy for their ruined lives, for their ruined happiness. And what are you doing?" Petrova's words touched her friend. Shankiewicz corrected herself. When Petrova was wounded, she was sent to the hospital. Not having finished treatment, Tatiana hurried to the front. More than 100 kilometers away, she found her unit and again took up a combat post. Lieutenant P. Lapushkin. On March 9, there was a meeting of the division command with Komsomol members. 346 people were present. The division commander and the head of the political department spoke before them. Semtom Somol told how they fight to strengthen military discipline, help commanders in the performance of combat tasks, what participation in the education of personnel. Komsomol members were faithful assistants of party organizations and commanders. More than once in a difficult moment of battle, by their personal example of courage, bravery inspired all the personnel to exploits in the name of the motherland. I told about it, describing this or that battle. Only for the period of winter offensive battles in 1945, 285 Komsomol members were awarded orders. The Komsomol organization of the Communication Company of the 1,243rd Rifle Regiment had 14 members of the Komsomol, and all 14 were awarded twice. The Order of Glory, 6, Red Star, 5, the rest had 2. Komsorg of the 1st Battery of the 932nd Art Regiment, Sergeant Vasily Petrovich Shmygo, born in 1922, Ukrainian, in Komsomol since April 1944. He destroyed 3 tanks, 3 armored personnel carriers, suppressed 10 enemy fire points, killed more than 100 fascists. He was awarded 3 orders. The Commissar Commander Vladimir Emanuilovich Lutsenko, born in 1925, Ukrainian, hit 3 tanks, 1 armored personnel carrier, suppressed 19 fire points, was awarded twice. The first number of hand machine gun of the 1,241st Rifle Regiment, Andrei Prokofyevich Sivalap, on January 11, 1945, during the counterattack of the enemy, was twice wounded and contused, but did not leave the battlefield, continuing to beat the enemy, destroyed 12 German. Komsomolet Zabora led a group of scouts. Going into the rear of the enemy, the group destroyed 2 firing points by a daring maneuver, took 2 fascists prisoner, captured 2 machine guns, 3 automatic rifles, 5 rifles, killed more than 20 Hitlerites. Komsomol scouts Schmitz, Yurov, Lukmanyuk sneaked into the rear of the enemy, captured a machine gun crew with a machine gun. Komsomolets Ivan Pavlovich Titov stormed the heights in the small Carpathians and with his machine gun fire mowed down the resisting enemy, which helped the infantry to move forward. Junior Sergeant Nikolai Prokopenko shot down 2 tanks with his machine gun. The division newspaper issued a leaflet about him. Glory to the hero Junior Sergeant Nikolai Prokopenko. There was a hot battle. The division went forward unstoppably. On the outskirts of the settlement, the enemy resisted. 4 camouflaged tanks, covering the retreat of their infantry, were firing incessantly. The brave Komsomol member Nikolai Prokopenko went into the flank of the enemy with his anti-tank gun and took a position. Soon he discovered German tanks. They stood in a row under the slope and were firing. Prokopenko pulled the trigger of his rifle. Black clouds of smoke enveloped the enemy vehicle. The fight continued. He took aim at the 2nd tank, and with the 3rd shot he lit it up as well. The unit went forward. Nikolai Prokopenko was awarded with an order. He received a Komsomol badge. A letter describing the feat and a photo card was sent to his parents. At night, the unit forced a fast, deep river. Komsomolets Reichkov entrenched at one oak tree. His machine gun covered the crossing. The unit got caught on the enemy bank. A hot fight ensued. The Germans launched a counterattack. They went in chains, showering the battlefield with a hail of bullets. Komsomol member Peter Ryshkov's eyes were burning with hatred for the fascists. "Go, go, Gads," whispered to himself machine gunner. Germans came even closer. Peter already saw their nasty faces and pressed the machine gun trigger. Hitlerites, mowed down by machine gun fire like sheaves, fell to the ground. The machine gunner hit without a miss and killed more than 30 fascists. German counterattack was repulsed. Our infantry, pursuing on the heels of the retreating enemy, broke into the village and liberated it. Extract from the political report of the political department of the 7th Guards Army. And the unit of Komsomol Senior Sergeant Alexander Fedorovich Kurbatov stealthily broke into the enemy trenches and in hand-to-hand combat killed up to 30 fascists. Kurbatov himself in the trench battle destroyed 8 Hitlerites. The leaflet Lightning was devoted to the combat deeds of Kurbatov's unit. Many battalion Komsomol organizations skillfully direct their work to ensure the implementation of tasks set by the command. Deputy Head of the Political Department of the 7th Guards Army Guards Colonel Dobryakov, April 6, 1945. In conclusion, General Karpukhin urged the Komsomol members to be vigilant and said that among the civilian population there could be fascist criminals and spies disguised in civilian clothes. Our Smersh captured a few of them. The commander set the task to prepare for offensive battles. March 11-12 held a two-day seminar of deputy commanders for political part of regiments and separate battalions. March 19 evening veterans of the division, which was attended by 150 people of the first formation, discussed the question of the tasks of veterans to educate young soldiers, to pass on the experience of the fight against the Nazi invaders. The veterans adopted an appeal to young soldiers. Here are some excerpts from the address. Warrior, you go to the west, the road of victory. You are a judge. Before you are criminals, executioners, be merciless to them. Kill the fascist ogre. Kill him with bullet, bayonet, grenade, shovel and butt, with everything you can. Destroy the fascist brigands. Don't let them get away alive. Take revenge on the vile executioners for the blood and tears, for the agony and death of innocent people. Farther and farther to the west, preparations for the offensive on the Brno-Bratislava direction in the units of the 2nd Ukrainian Front began from the first days of March 1945. On the night of March 25, 1945, the division reached the initial position for forcing the River Hron and the offensive on its western bank. The Hron is a fast river with a width of up to 80 meters and a depth of up to 2.5 meters. Boats were overturned from the swiftness of the current and from the impact of ice floes, which were still floating on the surface of the water. Hitlerites, well entrenched on the opposite bank of the river, tried to hold the water frontier. The system of fire allowed them to keep under the sight of the coastal strip and the water surface. However, our reconnaissance found that the enemy is not everywhere equally strong. Division Commander General Karpukin decided to start forcing the 1241st Rifle Regiment, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Vladimir Grigorievich Ataman. The silence over the river was broken by the rumble of gunshots, howling of numerous flying shells and mines Katyusha. The first columns of bursts flew over the enemy positions. Separate shots could not be heard. Everything merged into a continuous rumble, from which the ground trembled and groaned. The infantrymen looked at the fiery tornado that rained down on the enemy positions. Up in the air rose red rockets. That was the signal to land on the crossing vehicles. The 1st Battalion of the 1241st Rifle Regiment, whose commander was Senior Lieutenant Ryshakov, his deputy in political part, Senior Lieutenant Litsenko, rushed to the shore. Soldiers dragged boats, rafts, cords of kindling, pushed them off the shore and swam to the opposite shore. Fire raged nearby. Under the command of Lieutenant Sokolov, the first to land on the enemy shore were sappers of Sergeant Afanasiev and Sergeant Taronets, recipients of the Order of Glory, Communist. They had to scout the bank and pull up a cable across the river to speed up the transfer of assault group. When the rope was pulled, immediately groups of riflemen and sappers' calculations rushed on the boats. With difficulty under enemy fire, they overcame the turbulent river. Here especially clearly demonstrated well-organized cooperation. Among those who reliably ensured the forcing of the Hron were the Katyusha batteries supporting us. The 1st Division of the 932nd Artillery Regiment of Captain Viktor Matveyevich Potkin, his deputy in political part, Senior Lieutenant Georgy Nikolaevich Kushnarev, and the 3rd Division of Captain Fedor Fedorovich Kishyakov. Junior Lieutenant Pavlov's platoon reached the western bank of the Hron, and, without delay, under fire rushed at the enemy through the passage cleared of enemy mines by Komsomol members of the Komsomol, Knight of the Order of Glory Timbalyuk and Pravitipenko. Behind Pavlov's platoon attacked Hitlerite positions and other units of the battalion. In the hand-to-hand fight, they captured the first trench. The survivors of the Hitlerites raised their hands. Riflemen ran further, stumbling over the blocks of earth turned out by shells and mines bursts, falling into the craters, jumping up again and firing with automatic rifles, running, taking the second trench. The main forces of the division continue forcing. Sappers set up the crossing on rubber boats, dinghies, rafts, drag light guns, mortars and machine guns. Rattles cannonade of artillery, pouring its powerful fire on the enemy positions. Rolling artillery salvos complemented the explosions of mortars. Sappers transporters Komsol Pustovoy and Panishchuk under enemy fire confidently led forward their boats with infantrymen, weapons, ammunition. The sapper platoon of the Communist Lieutenant Pavel Pavlovich Supranenko, awarded with the Order of Red Star, made 25 trips. Suddenly, the explosion of an enemy mine threw Panishchuk and Pustovoy out of the boat into the water, but they did not leave their combat post, continuing to transport everything that was necessary for the battle, as well as more and more groups of riflemen. A shell exploded near the very boat of Junior Sergeant Koriniak, and a wave overturned it. 2 dismantled mortars, mines and shovels went to the bottom. The men of the unit swam back to the shore, took another boat and went to rescue the armament. The calculation held the boat by the rope, and Komsomolets Koriniak dived several times to the bottom of the icy river and took out the sunken armament. 2 mortar tubes, 2 plates, 45 pieces of mines and shank tools. From these mortars, the calculation then poured fire on the enemy. On the feet of Junior Sergeant Koriniak, our division issued a special leaflet. Here is a fire shaft of our artillery is removed into the depths of the enemy defense. On forcing the river begin to hit the surviving enemy machine guns. How dangerous their fire for the soldiers who are on the surface of the water, nothing protected from bullets. The guns of the 244th Separate Fighter Anti-Tank Division, commanded by Captain Skorobogatov, opened fire on the Nazi machine guns, which were revived after the artillery fire. The mortar platoon of Junior Lieutenant Garenko was also firing. One by one, the enemy machine guns were silenced. Forcing water obstacles has always been one of the most difficult types of combat. The success of forcing and fighting after forcing depends on many factors. In this case, the success provided a clear interaction of all branches of the troops. This is what was emphasized in preparation for forcing and fighting on the opposite bank division Commander General Karpukin and Chief of Staff Colonel Kaloshin, commanders of regiments, battalions and their staffs. No matter how well planned the forcing and fighting after the forcing, the decisive role still belongs to the soldiers. Their skill, dedication and willingness to honorably carry out the order of the active and continuous party political work, carried out by political workers, communists and Komsomol members greatly contributed to the creation of a fighting mood. This battle on the opposite bank of the Rhone was tense. Hitlerites tried with all their might to delay the advance of the 7th Guards Army, including our division. The enemy counterattacked with tanks and machine gunners. Our regiments, interacting with the tankers and supported by artillery, acted skillfully. The commander of the 1241st Rifle Regiment, Lieutenant Colonel Atamanov, organizing the battle in the depth of the Hitlerites' defense, skillfully used the power of firepower combined with maneuver and forced the enemy to hastily retreat to an unprepared defensive line. The attack was successful. 3 enemy trenches were captured. What was the secret of success of the 1241st Rifle Regiment? First of all, in the ability of the regiment commander to organize and continuously maintain interaction between all units of the regiment to carry out tasks precisely in time, place, and purpose. Lieutenant Colonel Atamanov envisioned possible directions of enemy counterattacks and the order of their reflection. He paid special attention to the interaction with the attached artillery division, commanded by Captain Pot. The regiment commander was able to emphasize the role of each unit in the overall picture of the battle and in accordance with the situation clarified the tasks. A platoon of Junior Lieutenant Pavlov burst into the 3rd trench of the enemy. The hand-to-hand combat begins. Suddenly an enemy machine gun rumbled from the flank. Private Artem Safonovich Stoyanov noticed this machine gun. Without thinking for a long time, he crawled up to it and destroyed its calculation with a grenade and, turning it towards another enemy machine gun point, destroyed its calculation with several bursts. Having captured 2 machine guns, Private Stoyanov joined his own. The division commander awarded him the Order of the Red Star for this feat. Fire bursts. On the right flank of the 3rd trench of the enemy has not yet taken. Our company rushed to the fascist trench. Suddenly from it opened fire surviving enemy machine guns. Our artillerymen and mortarmen, afraid to hit their own, forced to stop firing. The enemy immediately took advantage of this. He intensified fire. A shower of bullets pinned our soldiers to the ground. They were killed and wounded. The company lay low. In such cases, procrastination is like death. It was necessary to decide instantly, either, having risen, quickly run to the trenches of fascists and seize them, or move away, which meant to disrupt the attack, to suffer great losses. Lieutenant Grigory Pavlovich Zhukleyev, deputy battalion commander on political part, who is in the ranks of the attackers, passed on the chance. It is better to die in open combat than to expect death lying on the ground or stumbling backwards. Having seized a convenient moment, he stood in full height in full view of everyone. "My communists and Komsomol members, follow me forward," shouted the deputy commander and, waving his machine gun high up, was the first to rush towards the fascist trenches. His voice was drowned in the rumble of battle, but the soldiers of the company had already seen him, and all those who had survived by that moment as one stood up and, firing their automatic rifles on the move, throwing fans, rushed forward after him. That was the greatest outburst of courage, daring and bravery. Lieutenant Zuklayev, the deputy lieutenant, was the first to jump up on the berm of the enemy trench and looked back to see how the company was coming. At that moment, an enemy machine gun burst knocked him to the ground. Falling, he saw how the company broke into the trench. The Nazis could not withstand, retreated. So the son of the fatherland, the favourite and the soul of the battalion Grigory Pavlovich Zhuklayev, at the cost of his own life saved the lives of dozens of soldiers of the company, ensured the success of the battle. Having regrouped, Hitlerites with the support of tanks went into counterattack, but our soldiers did not waver. Letting the Nazis at close distance, they shot them at point-blank range, and the artillerymen hit their tanks. The Germans counterattacked several times, and each time the enemy rolled back. Battalion Commander Senior Lieutenant Ryshakov ordered the platoon commander Komsomol Junior Lieutenant Smirnov to bypass the enemy battery that was hindering the battalion's advance. Nikolai Vasilievich's platoon skillfully bypassed the enemy battery and suddenly attacked it boldly, destroyed the calculations, captured 2 guns, engaged the enemy infantry, hitting it from the flank. The enemy infantry trembled and was thrown back. When the first number was wounded, Mikhail Mikhailovich Russin, an ammunition carrier in the machine gun section, a Red Army man of the new replenishment from the village of Vorozhbina, Brest region, Berezovsky district, took the machine gun, crawled close to the counterattackers and opened fire on the Germans from the flank. 2 fascists tried to bypass him from the rear, but Mikhail quickly turned the machine gun and destroyed them. The platoon repulsed the enemy counterattack. For this feat, Russin was awarded the Medal for Bravery. A decisive attack from the front, blows from flanks and rear put Hitlerites in a difficult position. A solid wall of fire accompanying the infantry artillery saved the attackers from enemy bullets. The division repulsed from the enemy position after position. With the battle forced the heavily swamped river Nitra, with width up to 35 meters. Liberated the town of Komyatika settlements of Czechoslovakia Dol, Boyka, Andrevci, Dol, Pile. During the battles from March 25 to March 28, the units of the division inflicted considerable damage to the enemy. Up to 600 soldiers and officers were killed and 135 captured, 6 tanks and 5 vehicles were shot down, 10 guns, 10 mortars, more than 30 machine guns were destroyed, 1 tank, 5 self-propelled guns, 2 cannons, 1 large-caliber machine gun, 4 grenade launchers, 80 rifles, and many other military items were taken serviceable. The enemy began to retreat to Komano. At that time, west of the city, from the Danube, landed paratroopers of the 83rd Marine Brigade and, cooperating with the units of the 7th Guards Army, advancing from the east, including our division, surrounded the enemy and liberated Komano. On March 30 in Moscow, salutes to the valiant troops of the 2nd Ukrainian Front, who broke through the enemy defences in the Bratislava direction and captured the towns of Komano, Nove Zamki, Sharavki, Komjatik and Vrabel, were fired by 20 artillery salvos from 224 guns. Commander-in-Chief Stalin announced a commendation to all the personnel. This was the 14th commendation to the personnel of our division. After forcing the Grone and overcoming the powerful defensive strip of Hitlerites, with rows of wire barriers and minefields on April 3 after a hard fight, the division units knocked down the enemy from a strongly fortified line at the foothills of the Little Carpathians and came to the western slope of the mountains. The offensive shaft of the division rolled forward to the west. Dozens of large settlements liberated by the division, including the towns of Komjatis, Trnava, Schneitova, Seard and the Nitra and Vag rivers, forced with battles, were left behind. The fighting became more fierce and bloody. The Germans tried with all their might to stop our offensive, made strong counterattacks. Some settlements changed hands several times. The soldiers of the division, destroying the resisting enemy, unstoppable avalanche rushed in the direction of Bratislava. Other compounds of the 7th Guards Army, our neighbours on the right and left, also came to the west bank of the Grone, crushing infantry and motorised units of the enemy. In the reports received at the command post of the division commander, The names of settlements liberated from the enemy appeared more and more often. According to them, we counted the kilometers separating the forward units from Bratislava. Hitlerite's resistance increased. The enemy reserves transferred from other areas entered the. From reconnaissance data, it became known that the approaches to Bratislava are strongly fortified. There are numerous anti-tank and anti-personnel obstacles. A more powerful defensive line runs directly along the outskirts of the city. The streets of the city are blocked by barricades. Buildings are prepared for defense. The Front Commander Marshal of the Soviet Union, Rodion Yakovlevich Malinovsky, ordered the compounds of the 7th Guards Army, in which our 375th Division fought, to seize Bratislava bypassing from the northwest. Despite the abundance of engineering obstacles, stubborn resistance of the Nazis, the units of the 7th Guards Army successfully carried out a bypass of the city. Under the threat of encirclement, the fascists left the city. The insanely quick maneuver of our troops and swiftness of the offensive did not allow the enemy to destroy Bratislava, the pearl of Slovakia. Looking ahead, I will say that our division commander, Major General Vasily Dmitrievich Karpukin, became an honorary citizen of Bratislava. As I touched upon Karpukin, with whom I had to serve side by side in the division for more than a year, I would like to add a few more words to what has already been written about him. Vasily Dmitrievich knew and loved military affairs well, was restrained, polite, modest, and tactful in dealing with subordinates, highly disciplined. He aroused in me a feeling of respect and admiration. The offensive of the troops of the Second Ukrainian Front was so rapid that only in 3 days 7 major cities of Czechoslovakia were liberated, including the capital of Slovakia, Bratislava. In the order of April 330, the Supreme Commander-in-Chief Stalin declared gratitude to the troops of the Second Ukrainian Front, including our division, for the liberation of the city of Bratislava. And by continuous blows and daring maneuvers, the division continued, destroying the resisting enemy, to liberate settlements and cities of Czechoslovakia. For the exemplary fulfillment of the command's tasks during the capture of the towns of Malachi, Bruk, Privide, Banovce, and for the valor and courage shown, the division was awarded the Order of the Red Banner. Having overturned the resisting enemy, having overcome the mountainous and wooded border with persistent fighting, the 1243rd Order of the Red Banner Rifle Regiment, where the regiment commander, Lieutenant Colonel Ivan Karpovich Petrik, promptly attacked the enemy and liberated the railway station and the settlement of Robok. Anti-occupation of the station were captures. Guns 14, tractors 2, automobiles 24, machine guns 18 rifles, 285 automatic rifles 25, warehouses with ammunition 2 with food 1, cannons 6, tractors for 5, machine guns 12, burned 2 warehouses with ammunition, killed 380 soldiers and officers and 75 taken prisoner. The personnel of the regiment, despite the difficulties in overcoming the Little Carpathians and stubborn resistance of the enemy, inspired by the victories and thanks of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, bravely moved forward. The enemy, defeated at the foothills of the Little Carpathians, tried to delay the offensive in the mountains, ambushed in the gorges, on the roads and trails. But the soldiers of the regiment skillfully suppressed these pockets of resistance and moved forward. The 1241st Bucharest Rifle Regiment of the Order of Suvorov, having knocked down the enemy from a strongly fortified line at the foothills of the Little Carpathians, came to the western slopes of the mountains. The enemy at the boundary Ompiteia, Chester, had 2 lines of trenches prepared in advance, numerous pillboxes surrounded by barbed wire in 2 stakes and WZP. Here he wanted to stop our offensive. The regiment, with heavy fighting, overcame all obstacles, defeated the enemy, seized the stronghold of Ompiteia, captured a lot of trophies and captured more than 100 soldiers and officers. Red Army soldier Nikolai Yakovlevich Efemenko, with a group of soldiers through the passages made by sappers in minefields and wire barriers, penetrated into the flank of the enemy. The group opened fire and broke into the enemy trench. Efemenko killed several enemy soldiers and captured 1. By their actions, the group ensured the capture of the trenches by the company. The detachment of Junior Sergeant Ilya Kharlamov, coming in from the flank, suddenly attacked the enemy. The enemy retreated. The company on his shoulders broke into the settlement. Noticing that the enemy battery was firing at our infantry from behind the buildings, Kharlamov and his squad bypassed it, broke the calculations by a swift attack and captured 2 serviceable guns, which ensured the success of the battalion attack. San 245th Regiment during the offensive met stubborn resistance of the enemy, located on the dominating height over the terrain. It was necessary at all costs to dislodge him from there. In front went the 1st Battalion. He took the brunt of the Nazi tanks. The forces were melting. The regiment commander sent reinforcements to the battalion. A rifle platoon headed by the parterre of the 2nd Battalion, Junior Lieutenant Dmitry Semyonovich Gayev. The platoon stealthily approached the height from the opposite side and hit the Hitlerites. The enemy did not accept close combat and began to retreat to the village, shooting back. At the outskirts of the village, the platoon met with frontal machine gun fire, and mines were bursting from the flank. Dmitry Gayev was about to jump into the trench, but saw the muzzle of an automatic rifle. With his shot, the parterre for a fraction of a second ahead of the fascist. After the parterre rushed to the trench, a few more soldiers. 9 surviving Germans raised their hands. The officer fired his pistol and ran. But he could not get away. He was caught by machine gun fire from Gayev. This decided the outcome of the battle for the height. The commander of the machine gun company, Communist Lieutenant Ivan Fomich Kirillov, seeing that an enemy mine had disabled the entire machine gun crew, under enemy fire crawled up to the machine gun, lay down behind it, and repelled the counter-attacking fascists. Kirillov was informed that the battalion commander Major Spiel was killed. He, having taken command of the battalion on himself, repelled all Hitlerite counterattacks. Personnel of the battalion, reflecting the enemy counterattacks, showed exceptional persistence and heroism. The enemy tried to enter the flank of the battalion. Parter Junior Lieutenant Gayev went to the company, which repulsed the enemy attack and by personal example of heroism drew the soldiers into battle. The counterattack was repulsed. Dmitry Semyonovich Gayev died a death of the brave in this fight. An instructor of the 5th Rifle Company of the 1,241st Rifle Regiment, Komsomolets Senior Sergeant Asgard Akleyevich Aklev carried 6 seriously wounded in this battle. When several Germans approached him while he was carrying a wounded man, he joined the battle and fired at them with a machine gun. The Germans withdrew. Asgard carried the wounded man out. He was awarded the Order of Glory of the II. An instructor of the 2nd Rifle Company of the same regiment, Petty Officer Alexei Fedorovich Tybulsky, in difficult conditions of mountainous terrain in one battle took out from the battlefield 7 seriously wounded and 12 help. When the enemy soldiers opened fire on him, he put the wounded in a shelter and himself entered the battle, destroyed one of them with a grenade. The other German escaped. Tybulsky carried the wounded man to the medical station. Timely awarding of distinguished soldiers played a huge role in increasing the offensive impulse, courage and bravery in the attack. Awarding was made immediately after the feat. On the battlefield, the commander announced to his subordinate soldiers, officers, what award they are awarded. During the offensive battles from March 25 to April 3, 1945, awarded by orders of regimental commanders 153 people, the order of the division commander 25 people and 89 people presented for awarding by higher commanders, and the pursuit of the retreating enemy was swift. The Germans failed to stop anywhere and put up organized resistance. They fled to the west, abandoning everything. The swiftness and onslaught of our units were so great that the Germans did not have time to leave even on tanks, because our units captured bridges and fords over rivers. In many places they rushed on tanks into shallow rivers with the expectation of crossing, but water and swamps delayed them. On April 6, the division reached the Morava River, the border of Austria. The small Morava River flows in a wooded valley. It divides Czechoslovakia and Austria from the Czechoslovakian border village of Moravian Svatý Jan to the Morava, 3 kilometers, and on the other side of the river in 2 kilometers from the bank. The first Austrian town of Hohino, a strong stronghold of German defense. From the political report of the Political Department of the 7th Army for April 6, 1945, our troops, overcoming the increased resistance of the enemy, in a number of places came to the Austrian border. The first to reach the Austrian border was the connection where the chief of the political department was Colonel Inutinov. Having overcome the Little Carpathians, the fighters of this connection for 2 days of the offensive with fights advanced forward on 20 kilometers. Only in the battles for the railway station Rabrok, The enemy left on the battlefield about 400 corpses of his soldiers and officers. Deputy Chief of the Political Department of the 7th Guards Army, Guards Colonel Dobryakov, says a division was assigned the task to force the Morava River, seize the town of Homneu and advance along the western bank of the river to the north. On April 7, the division forced the Morava River with fierce fighting and captured a small bridgehead on its western bank near Huel. The enemy resisted stubbornly, went into counterattacks. Mortar platoon of Junior Lieutenant Stefan Ivanovich Goncharenko was the first of the mortar units to force the Morava River and supported the attacking rifle units with its fire. When the enemy counterattacked, the platoon covered him with fire. Up to 10 fascists broke through to the firing positions of the platoon. Mortars in a hand-to-hand fight exterminated those who broke through. Stepan Ivanovich killed 3 Hitlerites by machine gun fire. For the feat of forcing and in the battle on the bridgehead, many mortars were awarded, and platoon commander Stefan Goncharenko received the Order of the Red Banner. Frontal attacks for several days did not bring success. Then the commander of the 27th Infantry Corps ordered to make a bypass maneuver, covering from the front and going into the flank of the enemy to strike from the area of Ziridov to seize the town of Huhe. Fulfilling the order of the corps commander, Commander Karpukin decided, covering from the front 1,243rd Red Banner Rifle Regiment, to strike from the south 1,241st Bucharest Order of Suvorov and 1,245th Order of Bogdan Khmelnytsky Rifle Regiment, with the support of the 932nd Artillery Regiment, and seize the city of Hunaul. 2 days the battle was boiling. Especially fierce fights were in the area of the factory on the southern outskirts of the city, and only on April 14 Hunaul was cleared of Hitlerites. The personnel in the battles for Hunaul committed mass heroism, showed bravery. Here are some examples. The detachment of the 1st Rifle Company of the 1,241st Rifle Regiment of Sergeant Alexei Vasilievich Gatchenko crawled up to the trenches of the enemy, and with the cry "Hurrah!" broke into the trench. Many fascists were exterminated, 2 were taken prisoner. Red Army man Fyodor Timofeyevich Borodin crawled up to the house, from where the enemy machine gun was firing, threw an anti-tank grenade through the window. The machine gun stopped firing. Running from one shelter to another, he killed many enemy soldiers and took 4 prisoners. He was dead. In the area of the factory, enemy machine gun began to pour fire on our infantrymen. The commander of the 45mm gun, Sergeant Arseny Boykov, rolled his gun ahead of the infantry and opened fire on the enemy machine gun. The machine gun fell silent. The company went up in attack and broke into the city. The commander of the mortar company, Senior Lieutenant Babkin, supported the infantry attack with mortar fire. Developing the successful offensive, the division units captured the Austrian towns of Rostenburg and Bern-Gorstal by April 18, again entered the Czechoslovak territory and, having liberated Nezit, Prud, Polgar, Milovis, and the town of Mikulov on April 21-23, approached the Dija River. Especially fierce battle was played out on the approaches to the town of Mikulov, where the enemy occupied a favorable position for defense and tried to hold this line. The 1,245th Infantry Regiment repeatedly attacked the enemy, but, meeting strong resistance, was forced to withdraw to the original positions. The commander of the regiment, hero of the Soviet Union Major Pyotr Spirin, during the reflection of a strong counterattack of the enemy, went into the fighting order and led the personnel to the reflection of the enemy attack. The enemy was shot down from the heights. The regiment broke into the city. In this battle, Major Peter Spirin was seriously wounded. The enemy, covered by pre-prepared barricades, tried to stop our offensive in street battles. On one of the streets, the Germans forced our battalion to lie down by machine gun fire. Shemian Komsorg Senior Sergeant Nikolai Nikolaevich Zabalin organized a group of daredevils and led it to bypass the enemy. Bypassing the enemy, the group attacked the enemy from the rear, where he did not expect. The resistance of the enemy was broken. Hitlerites in panic rushed to escape. The city was cleared of fascists. For 2 days of fighting, the division captured 240 soldiers and officers of the enemy. In the city, the enemy left more than 100 corpses and a large number of weapons. Pursuing the retreating enemy, the 1,241st and 1,243rd Infantry Regiments forced the River Dyje occupied the village of Moshov and created a bridgehead between Dije and Jihlava. From the political report of the 7th Guards RDI. The enemy, relying on pre-prepared positions, put up strong resistance and undertook counterattacks. On the night of April 25, 1945, only on the section of the 1243rd Rifle Regiment, where the chief of the political department is Colonel Anutdinov, in Notinov, Hitlerites 7 times went into counterattack, trying to eliminate the bridgehead 1 on the western bank of the river Dye. However, meeting a strong response from our units, the enemy was forced to retreat to their former positions each time. In fierce battles, our soldiers, officers show high steadfastness, act exceptionally bravely. Chief of the Political Department of the 7th Guards Army Major General Zykov, Junior Lieutenant Yakov Vladimirovich Kotov, commander of the 2nd Rifle Company of the 1243rd Rifle Regiment, in the battles on the bridgehead several times with his company made a detour maneuver, destroyed the enemy, which ensured the advance of the regiment. He was awarded the Order of Patriotic War of II degree. Sergeant Maset Nazikovich Gabdrafetov, a squad leader of the 1st Rifle Company, took command of the company when the commander was wounded and led it to storm the enemy positions. He crawled up to the pillbox, broke into it, killed 3 fascists and took 2 prisoners. He was wounded, but did not leave the battlefield, continued to command the company. He was awarded the Order of Patriotic War of the I degree. And at the crossroads of highway and railroad, in the forest south of Pashtor, the enemy machine gun fire blocked the way of the company. Red Army man Alexei Semyonovich Kushkin, with a grenade in his hand, camouflaged, crawled at a close distance to the machine gun and threw a grenade. The machine gun fell silent. The company went forward. During the counterattack, several enemy machine gunners broke through to the firing positions of the mortar platoon of the 1243rd Rifle Regiment of Junior Lieutenant Nikolai Karpov. The mortar men destroyed all the enemy machine gunners who had broken through with the fire from automatic rifles and in hand-to-hand combat. Mortarman Katko, while repelling the counterattack, noticed their hand machine gun was silenced, crawled up to the machine gun, replaced the wounded machine gunner, and opened fire on the fascists. The Red Army man was wounded while repulsing the counterattack, but refused to leave the battlefield and continued to fight. The detachment of Senior Sergeant Alexander Fedorovich Kurbatov was the first to break into the trench of the enemy, destroyed dozens of fascists, which ensured the capture of the trench by the platoon. The Soviet army came to Europe not for occupation, but for the liberation of the peoples of Europe from the fascist yoke. Crowds of people, feeling free, with red flags, came out in many towns and villages to meet our units. The population of Romania at first treated us with noticeable wariness. And why should it not be so, if the fascist propaganda had been telling tall tales about the Red Army for years, such as that Soviet soldiers were killing infants? And then we took a closer look and everything became different. The Romanians realized our peacefulness and began to treat us with trust. We entered the Romanian capital Bucharest on August 31, 1944 together with the troops of the 1st Romanian Volunteer Division named after Tudor Vladimirescu. Bucharest was in the hands of the rebellious people. They greeted us enthusiastically and warmly. Despite the fact that it was early morning, thousands of festively dressed citizens embraced our warriors liberators, proclaimed in their honor. Girls presented them with flowers. Women treated them with fruit. On squares they organized dances. Our people do not remember evil. The soldiers responded to greetings with an open soul, as if there were no battles in which the soldiers had to fight against the Romanian troops. This is a consequence of the great work that was carried out in the parts of our division. Commanders, political workers, party and Komsomol organizations constantly instilled in the soldiers that Romanian fascism is not the Romanian people. When the sun rose over Bucharest, shopkeepers opened stores. Shoe shiners offered their services to our officers and soldiers. Policemen in brown suits with large discs of caps stood at street intersections and greeted passing soldiers and officers. I do not remember an occasion when any of our soldiers or officers dropped the honor of a Soviet man. Our division was in Bucharest for more than 10 days, carrying out garrison duty. We behaved not only in Romania, but also in all European countries, where we fought with fascists as internationalists. We shared everything we had with people freed from fascist yoke. We gave bread, sugar to children, helped peasants to repair mowers, tractors. I think the people of Bucharest comparing us with fascists will never forget how Hitlerites, when they left the city, brutally bombed it, destroyed the National Theatre, the telephone exchange and many residential houses, not to mention the abuse of the people. I remember the first days on Hungarian soil. The settlements through which our division passed surprised us at first by their desertion. Here we did not have such solemn gatherings as in Bucharest or Transylvania. In the Hungarian villages, the inhabitants were few. They had gone inland, and those who remained tried not to be seen, hiding in cellars, bunkers. It turned out that Hitlerites and their Hungarian lackeys intimidated the population with wild versions, monstrous tall tales about the Soviet man, about the atrocities of the Red Eye, as if they killed all Hungarians indiscriminately, robbed, raped. However, as time passed and the ice of distrust began to melt, the population soon became convinced that the Soviet soldier did not kill and rob. More and more often, ordinary people entered into conversations with us, asking about the Soviet Union, which until now they had hardly known. A true popular rumor went uncontrollably through the Hungarian land. In towns and villages, more and more inhabitants began to stay, and those who had left earlier began to return to their homes, less hiding. In Austria, the locals treated us differently. As a rule, they did not welcome our soldiers, as it was in Czechoslovakia. They avoided meetings with us, hiding in bunkers. For example, in the town of Huhiniu, the population began to appear only after dozens of broadcasts through the sound station of the political department, which spoke about the purpose of the Red Army's arrival in Austria. Captain Skorobogatov, the commandant of the town of Huhino, appointed by us, and Major Rubenovich, the instructor of the political department for work among the enemy troops and population, held a number of conversations with the population. They picked up in the local authorities people who were in power before the Nazis came. Emil Rigger, a former burgomaster, was appointed as burgomaster. Soon red flags began to appear on every house. When we asked them why they put up red flags, many answered that it was in appreciation for the liberation. More than 100 residents of the city took part in the funeral of Lieutenant Popov, commander of the 6th Rifle Company, and other soldiers who had fallen in the battles for Hofano. When the coffins were lowered into the grave, some of the residents wept. Despite the fact that the Germans intimidated the Austrian people with fables about the atrocities of the Red Army, the population of the town mostly remained in place. Even the shopkeepers did not evacuate. And in the village of Ravensburg, the population ran out to meet our soldiers. Many threw themselves into our arms. After our broadcast through the trench-sounding station of the Soviet government statement, the inhabitants began to ask questions. Is it really true that the Allied powers intend to restore an independent Austria? What will be the national flag? Within what boundaries will there be a free Austria? And others. Of course, they did not expect such a declaration by the Soviet government and such humane treatment by the Soviet army. In the village of Pashtorka, more than 200 Soviet citizens, forcibly taken by Hitlerites to Germany, worked at the military factory. Evdokia Fyodorovna Rogova, 52, Lydia Petrovna Sviridova, 59, and Maria Semenovna Kulikova, 18, from Dnepropetrovsk, who were taken away from Stalingrad in November 1942, told us that they were engaged in loading and unloading works for 14 hours a day. They lived in wire-fenced wooden barracks, 2 kilometers away from the factory. They went to work under escort, were not allowed to socialize with the population, and were beaten and severely punished for leaving the barrack. Beatings were commonplace. Wages were 3-5 marks a month, but even this money could not buy anything, as no one was allowed out of the barracks. They were fed, in Rogovar's words, with balanda. When they met us, they rejoiced and said with tears in their eyes, "At last we are no longer slaves." The people of Czechoslovakia were especially hospitable and warmly welcomed us. As soon as we entered one or another settlement, everyone from small to old came out to meet us, greeting us with shouts, waving red and multicolored flags. Everyone tried to help our soldiers in any way they could. With all their behavior, they expressed deep sympathy to our soldiers. Many of them invited us to visit them. And it was pleasant to the Russian soldier that far from his native land he met friends. Girls met in national holiday costumes. They surrounded the soldiers, hugged, kissed. Joyful tears were pouring from the eyes of old ladies. Boys lovingly stroked the barrels of soldiers' automatic rifles, shouted, jumped on the footsteps of cars that were barely moving. Soviet and Czechoslovak flags, and the slogan "Long live the Red Army," were hung everywhere. At one of the intersections, a festively dressed local teacher and her students greeted passing soldiers for a long time, shouting slogans and waving flags. And on squares, young people arranged dances with our soldiers. Fighters and officers were pelted with flowers. In the locality of Enol, our units were met by Czech musicians. The orchestra played Soviet marches. Women brought out food, fruit, water, treated the soldiers. Rapid Soviet offensive in April 1945 led Hitler's army to the final collapse. On May 2, Berlin fell. The resistance of the main forces of Nazi Germany was broken. But the war was not over yet. On the territory of South Germany, Czechoslovakia and Austria, there was a large group of Nazi German troops, numbering more than 62 divisions and a significant number of reinforcements, which was commanded by Field Marshal General Schör. This group refused to capitulate. On this group relied those who hoped to prolong the existence of the Nazi regime in Germany. The Soviet command decided to defeat and capture Schörner's group by strikes of the 1st, 2nd and 4th Ukrainian fronts in extremely short time, to take possession of Prague and thus complete the liberation of Czechoslovakia. On May 3, the citizens at Prague revolted against the fascist invaders in the city. But the forces were unequal. Against 30,000 rebels, strong in spirit, but poorly armed, stood the superior forces of the fascist group of General Schörner, trying to turn Prague into the last fortress of the Nazi Empire. Bleeding, the rebels fought on the barricades. Their forces were dwindling by the hour. They were in danger of being killed, and the city was in ruins. Then the rebels radioed for help. The Soviet command immediately responded. Soviet tank armies from near Berlin moved to help the Prague rebels. The offensive of the Second Ukrainian Front, which included our division, was accelerated. The soldiers of the division, having learned that we were coming to the aid of the rebellious Czechoslovak brothers, were eager to fight. In these days, in the offensive zone of our division, without ceasing for a minute, fierce fighting was going on. The division, supported by artillery, tanks, and aviation, went forward, liberating the settlements of Czechoslovakia. But on the approaches to the settlements of Shumis and Ledenice, Hitlerites, by the introduction of reserves into the battle at the previously prepared line, stopped our advance. The division was tasked to prepare and break through the defense with a powerful blow. Night came. It was drizzling fine rain. Major Akhmetzianov, the regiment's deputy commander on political part, and Senior Lieutenant Rikardatoft, the regiment's party commander, went from one company to another all night long, asking whether the soldiers were fed, whether they had everything for tomorrow's battle, reporting news, calling for vigilance. By their presence, they instilled confidence in victory. The soldiers impatiently waited for the morning to break through the enemy's defenses, to make a rush for tens of kilometers ahead. This thought occupied every soldier. Everyone wanted to come to the aid of the rebellious Pryzans faster. The night passed in preparation and in anticipation of the battle. Battalion Commander Senior Lieutenant Sergeyev called to himself the battery commander of 45mm guns Senior Lieutenant Kromov and said, pointing to the map, "The fascists have got their teeth into this intersection. We must knock them out of there before reinforcements come to them. If we're too late, we'll have to beat them back with a lot of blood. Your task, to hit the machine gun points, to accompany the infantry in the attack, to be ready to meet the enemy tanks." At dusk, the squads took a firing position, dug trenches, slits for shelter, laid shells. As soon as it began to dawn, the division commander Major General Karpukin once again looked over the terrain and ordered. Immediately the air shuddered from the gun salvo of the 932nd Artillery Regiment, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Afanasy Andreyevich Ryasny, his deputy in the political department, Major Andrei Mikhailovich Timofeyev, and the Army Artillery Regiment supporting us. In the sky stretched streaks from volleys of the Guards' mortars, Katyusha. Artillery and mortars were firing, not sparing shells and mines. In front, behind the fighting order of the 1st Attacking Battalion, commanded by Senior Lieutenant Vladimir Ivanovich Sergeyev, black sultans of earth soared up. In a minute, the German stronghold was covered with smoke and dust. Behind the firing rampart, the soldiers of the battalion rushed into the attack. The soldiers of the separate anti-tank fighter division of Captain Skorobodatov put their guns on direct aim. The main forces of the division began to rapidly come to the attack line. From the observation point of the division commander could see how the paratroopers came off the tanks and, keeping up with them, rushed into the attack. A barrage of fire fell on the firing points, revived after the artillery preparation deep in the enemy defences. Here the attackers came to the first trench of the Germans. Grenade fire sounds over the chain of command. Explosions of grenades envelop the enemy positions. Fire points are silenced. Many Hitlerites raise their hands, surrender. And again forward, in some places hand-to-hand fighting begins. On the Red Army soldier Ivan Vasilievich Shevchuk rushed 3 Hitlerites, but the former soldier is not so easy to overcome. Ivan participated in many hand-to-hand combat. He was twice wounded, twice awarded. Shevchuk quickly put down by the fire of his machine gun all 3 fascists. Red Army man Vasily Ivanovich Sazonov noticed an enemy machine gun point, which was firing on the platoon. He crawled up to the enemy machine gun from the flank and destroyed its calculation with a grenade. He took the machine gun and opened fire on the fleeing fascists. The platoon went forward. The machine gun point of the enemy did not let the company advancing on the village Shumets. Private Communist Alexei Semenovich Bondarenko crawled up to the enemy machine gun and silenced it forever with an anti-tank grenade. In this battle Bondarenko was wounded. Having bandaged his wound, he continued the fight, destroyed 7 more Hitlerites. Senior Lieutenant Kromov saw the infantrymen rushing to the fascist trenches by short runs. Suddenly from the flank of the company the enemy machine gun rumbled. Squad to the gun. Much commanded the commander. Charge with fragmentation fugitive. Fire. Not far from the machine gun a column of earth flew up. A miss. Several more shells, one after another, sent gunner Efretov. The machine gun fell silent. We had to move forward, following the attacking company. Grabbing the straps, artillerymen began to roll guns. When they reached the right place, they unfolded the racks, fixed the guns and opened fire on the targets, which were indicated by the commander of the 2nd Rifle Company, Senior Lieutenant Maletsky, and 2 more enemy firing points were silenced. When the gunner of one gun was seriously wounded, Senior Lieutenant Kromov himself took the gunner's place and suppressed the fire of 2 enemy machine guns with several shots. The company knocked the Hitlerites out of the stronghold. In this fight, the veteran, the hero of Division Sergei Dmitrovich Stepanov, distinguished himself. Outwardly very calm, but focused look expresses a big, strong nature. Wrinkles, cut the steep forehead, remind of heavy battles and campaign. Beautiful, like Chapai mustache, slightly twisted upward, complements the image of the Russian former soldier. Excellent knowledge of military affairs, multiplied by ingenuity, courage, and daring in battle. Such precious qualities possessed a modest communist Sergeant Stepanov, twice awarded for his exploits. He, with his 3-rifle gun, beat the White Guards at Voloshaevka, chased the interventionists. In the division he became a mortar man. With his calculation in this battle supported the attack of Maletsky's company. The Germans counterattacked the company and broke into the firing positions of the mortars. At the head of Stepanov, mortar men engaged in hand-to-hand combat and exterminated the invading fascists. Sergeant Stepanov, with his 3 rifles, stabbed 3 Hitlerites. To this we can add the following. In December 1943, Sergei Dmitrovich participated in reconnaissance and took 3 Hitlerites prisoner. The enemy went into a counterattack. The enemy tanks appeared, shooting on the move. They were approaching the positions of the company. They were followed by machine gunners. Senior Lieutenant Kromov, who was still in the formation instead of the gunner, was watching the tank, which was moving directly to their firing position. Suddenly the tank made a small turn, obviously searching for a target, and set it aside. Kromov pressed the trigger lever. The shell hit the caterpillar. The machine spun in one place. 3 more shells sent Kromov. A column of smoke rose above the machine. Flames burst out. The commander of the 1241st Rifle Regiment, Major Atomov, reported to the division commander that the enemy was advancing reserves in the direction of the heights on a tactically advantageous line for a counterattack. The division commander, General Karpukian, decided to prevent the Hitlerites from deploying reserves in combat order. With a rapid attack, he decided to capture the heights, to seize the settlements of Shumis and Lodin. After a short time in the territory of the fascists, everything came to life. From the air to the ground stretched out trails of shells. From the aircraft cassettes on the heads of the enemy sprinkled shrapnel bombs. Above the ground rose columns of smoke and dust. Stormtroopers one after another went there, and threw their deadly cargo on Hitlerites, mowed them down with machine guns. White caps of bursts of enemy anti-aircraft shells hung here and there, but nothing could stop our Falcons. When our airplanes finished hitting the enemy, our artillery immediately opened fire on the Germans. The enemy's plan collapsed. The division commander pressed binoculars to his eyes. Everything was visible as on the palm of his hand. The enemy withdrew, and part of the survivors of the Nazis raised their hands and surrendered as prisoners. The soldiers of the 1,241st Rifle Regiment rushed forward along the field, cleared the heights from the Nazis, and on the shoulders of the retreating enemy broke into the village of Shumis, and the 1,245th Rifle Regiment into Lodz. On the approaches to Shumis, German machine guns opened fire on our infantry. Here the hero of the day became a communist gunner Efriator Belgen. He, sending shell after shell, suppressed 3 machine gun points of the enemy. Our soldiers went forward. Efriator Belgen had not yet had time to cool down from the fight with machine guns, as he heard the shout of the command, "Melgin Ferdinand! Nazi, let him come closer." Self-propelled slowly, often stopping, came out of the forest. He who has strong nerves and strong will wins. Although he was tempted to hit the self-propelled vehicle which was approaching, aiming the cannon, it seemed, right at him. But he restrained himself, waiting for the right second, and pressed the lever. A heated duel began. Black thick clouds of smoke enveloped the German machine. For courage and bravery shown in the battles for the village of Shumis, Sergeant Belgin was awarded the Order of Glory. The next day, the new offensive of the division started from this line. Dozens of settlements were liberated with battles, including Milosovis, Jezazezany, Marsovis, Grubsis, Noawies. The 899th German Guard Battalion came over to our side, led by Captain Beitkote Kott of the 3rd Company and Bauk Hanswalme of the 2nd Company. Captain Kott testified that the company he commanded had stayed in the woods as soon as the Russians took the offensive. So decided to stay with it as well, not wanting to shed any more blood needlessly. Then the soldiers of the 1st and 2nd Companies joined this company. In these days surrendered more than 1,000 soldiers and officers. The prisoners testified that, from our transmissions through the trench sound system, they learned that Hitler and Goebbels shot themselves. They also heard a proclamation to the German soldiers to surrender. The division continued to pursue the retreating enemy, with battles liberating settlements of Czechoslovakia, went forward to Prague. The 8th Jaeger and 211th Infantry Divisions of the Germans, supported by tanks, continued to offer strong resistance. The battalion commander took his eyes off the map and looked at the company commander, Senior Lieutenant Maletsky, as if he wanted to make sure once again that he was ready for the upcoming difficult task. "The task is difficult," said the commander, "but doable. You are given a significant reinforcement. Mortar battery, tank platoon, anti-tank battery, and sapper department. According to intelligence, the enemy, having equipped their positions on the dominant height, all approaches to it controls. There may be surprises on your way at every step. Ambushes, prepared fire bags, minefields. Everything must be taken into account." The company moved with great caution along the mountain road. Suddenly the signal, mine, Sergeant Borisov, a sapper, and Private Alimov were the first to step forward. They checked the road meter by meter and found mines. Other sappers quickly neutralized them. But then the enemy suddenly opened fire on the company. The company entered the battle. Mortars and artillerymen, having successfully taken positions, began to suppress enemy fire points. Now the main thing was not to give the enemy to recollect. Of the company, supported by tanks on the passages in the minefield, rushed forward. And a little earlier on the right and left began the battle for the height of the group, which were to ensure the reflection of possible counterattacks from the flanks in the company's fight. It was a swift rush, and a hand-to-hand fight broke out at the Hitlerites' positions. The outcome of the battle was decided by the main forces of the battalion. Bloody trace of fascists. The division, having forced the rivers Rokitina and Inglava, liberated dozens of settlements, including the city of Inglava. Warmly welcomed in the previous settlements we had liberated, we naturally expected something similar here in Inglava. But we were met with a dead, mournful town. Small groups of children and adult Czechs with national flags greeted us, but it was obvious that they had not been freed from something they had experienced. There was a deep sadness on their faces. Many houses were locked, windows closed despite the heat. I approached an old woman who was pasting signs on the doors of the houses saying Czechs live here. A conversation ensued, from which I learned what had happened in the city. I froze as I listened to the anti-fascist teacher's terrible tale of Inglava's misery during the years of occupation. The Nazis made Inglava more than half a German town. Czechs coming from Germany were kicked out of their homes into the street by the Germans. Floors were full of signs. For Germans only. The children of Czechs could not study. Czechs were beaten. Czechs were spit in the eye. Therefore the offences, the grief we have experienced and our pride, said the teacher, dictated that we mark the Czechs as homes. Let the Russian soldiers, our brothers and liberators, know that in these houses they will be received with open arms. The old woman invited us to go into the house of a family who had been forbidden by the Germans for years to leave the yard. The apartment was closed. With the help of neighbours we opened the door and went in. Everything in the house was in its place. The old man was sitting by the stove with his forehead against the wall. The two girls were lying on the bed. The mother was behind the closet door, but none of them raised their heads. They had all been killed by pistol shots to the back of the head and forehead. Bitter tears poured from the eyes of the Czechs who entered. Straining herself from sobbing, the old woman whispered, "This is the work of the fascists this night." I reported this to the commandant and asked him to take action. On the street, our soldier pasted hastily made signs. The water in the water pipe is poisoned. We also learned about the fate of the Czech village of Lidais, which was razed to the ground by the Nazis like many Russian, Ukrainian and Belarusian villages. Czechoslovak publicist Jaroslav Marzel, who after the war familiarized himself with the archival documents of fascist Germany, writes, during the check of 104 children of Lidais, only 9 were recognized as racially pure. Then these 9, with false documents and German names given to them, were transferred to Nazi families for appropriate re-education. They survived and returned home after the war without knowing their native language. The other 95 children, recognized as inferior, were sent to a concentration camp. Only 9 returned after the war. The rest perished in the gas chambers of Chelmno. The Soviet army saved not only Czechoslovakia, but also a number of other European countries from certain death, brought freedom to the German hard-working people. The soldiers of our 375th Ural Division fought for the liberation of the peoples of 4 countries of Europe, Romania, Hungary, Austria and Czechoslovakia. In the battles for the liberation of these countries from fascism, hundreds of soldiers of the division laid down their heads, who on unforgettable dates delivered us from the scourge of war. Soviet soldiers, heroes of the Soviet country. Thank you. As brother soldiers, heroes of the Soviet country. Operation German poet. Victory May. On May 8-9, 1945, in Karlhorst, a suburb of Berlin, the German military command signed an act of unconditional surrender. This historic document proclaimed to the whole world the end of the bloody war in Europe, the victory of the forces of progress over the forces of fascism and reaction. However, a group of fascist General Schörner was operating on Czechoslovak soil. This Hitler's warrior against common sense continued senseless struggle. Our Ural 375th Kharkov-Bucharest Red Banner Rifle Division, having captured the Czechoslovak villages of Odravice, Shumis, Mogelno, as a part of the 7th Guards Army continued fighting to clear forests and settlements in the area of Leges from scattered groups of Hitlerites. The 7th Guards Army was commanded by Colonel General Mikhail Stepanovich Shumilov. This fearless general had great military experience. Back in the years of civil war, beat Kolchak, Makhno, Rangel, commanding a company, then a regiment. In the years before the war, he commanded a division corps. The combat deeds of the 64th Army under his command in the Battle of Stalingrad, in battles in Romania, Hungary, Austria, Czechoslovakia are widely known. Now Mikhail Stepanovich rushed to the aid of the inhabitants of Prague. Our division, loaded on cars of various brands, from Soviet Gaziks to self-confident duck-like stewed bakers, was rushing along the Spring Road. Somewhere from the north, the Ural tankers were approaching Prague. It was at that time that the final chord of the war in Europe was sounded. From time to time there were short jams in the head of the column. It was desperately trying to prevent us the scattered groups of Hitlerites who clung to every height, every settlement with their teeth. Suddenly we stopped again. I opened the door of my trophy Opel Super and saw the following picture. Soldiers jumping from the stopped cars, shouting, whistling, pushing each other, laughing. Vic from end to end of the column carried a thunderous hurrah. The shot of machine gun bursts rang out. Multicolored rockets and pilotkas flew up into the sky. There was no limit to jubilation. It turned out that the technician cinematographer, Senior Lieutenant Mikhail Vasilievich Sinkin, caught the voice of Moscow, which announced the end of the war. In all units spontaneously arose rallies. Soldiers vowed to finish the resisting enemy. The column set off on its way. Each unit considered it an honor to be the first to break into Prague. Let's take Prague. These words were on the lips of every soldier. Although we still had to fight for the complete liberation of Czechoslovakia, but everyone knew that what we had fought for at Moscow, Kursk in Ukraine and Moldavia, and then smashing the enemy on the territory for European countries went west. The advanced detachment of the 1,245th Rifle Regiment of the Order of Bogdan Khmelnytsky, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Georgy Ivanovich Puzanov, was approaching the village by cars. Suddenly, from the height in front of the village, Hitlerites opened machine gun and mortar fire on the column. The soldiers jumped from the cars and, having turned in combat order, attacked the fascists. The enemy intensified fire. Our infantry lay low, opened fire with automatic rifles and machine guns on the enemy. Communist Alexander Bystrov crawled up to the enemy machine gun and threw a grenade. The machine gun was silenced. Peter Domenikov's mortar crew suppressed the fire of 3 machine gun points. When the gunner of the manual machine gun was seriously wounded, Junior Lieutenant Dmitry Bayev lay down behind the machine gun and suppressed the fire of the enemy machine gun. Lieutenant Ivan Pishev, the regiment's commissar commanding nadies into battle, manned himself rushed forward. After him the soldiers came up and, firing on the move, rushed to the height. Pursuing the retreating enemy, they seized the village. Some Hitlerites, shooting back, tried to escape into the woods, but they were overtaken by the accurate lines of our machine gunners and machine gun of the calculation of Senior Sergeant Vasiliev. Many Hitlerites raised their hands. Communists Bayev and Bondarenko went in the first ranks of attackers. When they broke into the outskirts of the village, Alexei Bondarenko saw that Hitlerites were shooting from the window of one house. He quickly crawled to the building and threw a grenade into the window. The machine gun was silenced. One fascist came out through the door and wanted to run away. He was killed by a cue from the machine gun. Many enemy soldiers surrendered as prisoners. They took them to the headquarters Komsol Pishev. The fight was hard. How difficult it is to tear off from the ground his weighed-down body when you know that the war is over. It is even more difficult to rush towards the machine gun bursts. The Germans shoot as if they were afraid that they would not have time to use the remaining cartridges. Each warrior realized that this attack could be the last, victorious, but everyone realized that there would be dead, and how everyone wanted to live. Having broken through several enemy barriers on the outskirts of Prague, the division rushed forward by car. Behind left dozens of villages and villages of Czechoslovakia. For May 7 and 8 on the way to Prague, the regiments of the division destroyed more than 300 fascists, captured about 700 Hitlerites, captured 10 serviceable tanks, more than 200 vehicles, many guns and mortars, wagons with cargo. In cruel fights near Prague, when the whole world was already rejoicing and the sun of victory rose above the earth, many soldiers, killing the resisting enemy, fell on the battlefield. Bitter and painful. At the line Gorshavis, Jonas, we came into contact with the American Army units. Now they are rushing forward to seize more territory, and when we were bleeding, they delayed the opening of the second front in every possible way. The war is over. Let's embrace, soldiers. Our deed is done, and our duty is done. A few years ago I visited Ryshev, the Kursk Bulge, the Dnieper, where the division fought bloody battles, walking along the places where once there were trenches and trenches. Standing on these borders, I mentally returned to those formidable days. The events came alive in my memory, as if I heard the sounds of battle again, thought about my battle friends, comrades. My comrades in arms stood before me as if in reality one after another. I thought about those vital sources of high morale which determined the heroic behavior of each of them, thought about the party political work in the division. All party political work was conducted under the slogan, "Our cause is right." The enemy will be defeated, victory will be for us. The main direction was to explain the just goals of the great patriotic war, to educate the personnel in the spirit of Soviet patriotism, love for the motherland, steadfastness and courage, to selfless struggle against the enemy. In the division, there were several tens of thousands of soldiers belonging to different generations and nationalities, and all these people were linked into one whole by spiritual community. We were brothers, like-minded, all lived with one thought: to defeat the enemy, to defend the honor, freedom and independence of the fatherland. Everyone was ready to give his life in the name of this great, and this common trait for all soldiers united them into an invincible force, created confidence in victory over the invaders. After the defeat of the Nazis near Moscow, the main attention of the political department, political workers, party and Komsomol organizations of the division was focused on the education of the soldiers' high offensive impulse, the desire to defeat the enemy and liberate the Soviet land from the fascists. Our division went forward a long and difficult road. Truly inexhaustible was the offensive impulse of soldiers, and this was largely facilitated by continuous concrete, focused party political work. It was addressed to the heart of the soldier, awakened in him courage, bravery, heroism, the desire to defeat the enemy with decisive actions. Commanders in combat tasks constantly relied on political workers, party and Komsomol activists, their first assistants, people of high courage, deeply understanding the patriotic duty, able under enemy fire to raise the soldiers who fell to the ground and lead them in the attack. As experience shows, party political work brings the desired results only when it is well thought out, prepared, carefully planned. Needless to say, in the first months of the war, not all of our political workers had a clear understanding of what should be the political support of the battle. Before the Great Patriotic War, I was a commissar of a rifle battalion in the battles near Lake Kazan in 1938, then a propagandist of a rifle regiment in the battles with the White Finns in 1940. But despite the acquired combat experience, already being the head of the political department of the division since August 1941, I had to constantly learn, reorganize the content, forms and methods of my activities and the political department in relation to the conditions of battle, to look for new, the most effective forms of work with people, and teach it to the party political workers of regiments and battalions. Taking into account the combat situation, there were held meetings, seminars of deputy commanders on political part, party leaders, comsorg of regiments, battalions, agitators, editors of combat leaflets, where the experience and forms, methods of political support of various types of combat were studied. They read lectures and reports. We held party, Komsomol and Komsomol meetings and asset meetings, rallies, meetings of personnel, briefings, seminars. Very memorable are the brief party and Komsomol meetings before the battle, at which business discussions were held on how to conduct political work during the battle, how to better ensure the interaction of riflemen, artillerymen, tankers, sappers. After the meetings, the communists held conversations with the soldiers. They told how to act if the unit during the offensive falls under enemy artillery fire. It is necessary not to stop, but to go forward to approach the enemy in order to overcome the zone of shelling and defeat by enemy shrapnel with a swift rush, since the enemy is not firing artillery and mortar fire directly in front of their positions. This provides the greatest likelihood of surviving the battle. Movement at the minimum safe distance from the firing shaft of his artillery allows you to get close to the enemy and impose a fight, for which he is not yet ready. Thus, in intimate conversations, political workers, communists explained to the soldiers the tactics of offensive combat, and during the attacks inspired them by personal example. According to the situation, and when required, we held meetings of party assets of the division and regiments. I remember well the meeting of party assets of the division, which was held on March 7, 1945. At this meeting, with the report on the vanguard role of the communists in the last battles and further tasks of the party organization, was made by the division commander Major General Karpukin. The meeting was attended by 120 communists. Party organizations, said the speaker, have done a lot of work to ensure the performance of Combat Tasks Division, thanks to the political and educational work carried out among the personnel. Soldiers and commanders showed exceptional resilience, reflecting the fierce attacks of enemy tanks and infantry. Communists in the battles showed examples of heroism and courage, inspired the soldiers by their personal. The reporter gave a number of examples of heroism of communists. In conclusion, the task was set before the party staff to strengthen educational work with the personnel, widely popularize the heroic deeds of the heroes of the units, to prepare the division for offensive battles. Political workers, party and Komsomol organizations, continued the speaker, need to improve the style of their work, given the fact that we are fighting in the territory of countries that fought on the side of the Nazis. It is necessary for the soldiers to take a differentiated approach to people, to treat the civilian population humanely. It is, of course, difficult because in the soul of every soldier there is hatred for the enemy. Certainly, one of the main directions in the party political work was the cultivation of the soldiers' burning hatred of the enemy, the exposure of the man-hating essence of fascism, the brigand character of Hitler's army. The division was advancing on the territory, where at every step traces of unheard-of Hitlerite atrocities were visible. Destroyed and scorched villages, corpses of Soviet people, captured soldiers, exhausted, hungry population. There was no need for long conversations here. With a brief remark or a few words addressed to the soldiers, we achieved a lot. On May 12, 1944, our division newspaper published photos of atrocities and excerpts from letters of eyewitnesses of fascist robbery. Bandits tortured citizens, burned engineer Fadi Shakurba. 2 children were thrown into a well, burned to the ground the villages of Borshevo and Ostrovets, where 250 people died, including 67-year-old Peter Markov. In Hungary, 16 corpses with traces of violence were found during the occupation of the Lord's Yard. The commission, created by the political department from doctors, officers of the political department and the division headquarters, established that all 16 Soviet prisoners of war were captured severely wounded. This is evidenced by the presence of bullet and shrapnel wounds in the corpses, bandaged with individual bags. It was also established that the fascists, with their inherent sadism, mocked the helpless victims, after which they killed them with point-blank shots in the head with bursting bullets. Only 5 people could be identified, as the faces of the others were disfigured and burned by point-blank shots in the face. All these facts caused in soldiers a burning hatred to fascists. In the next battles they beat and destroyed Hitlerites with triple force. To maintain the offensive spirit, sometimes it was enough a short message about the success of the unit, an example of heroism of soldiers, encouragement or rewarding the fighter. For the effectiveness of party political work in the offensive battle, the most important thing is its continuity. The political department of the division, deputy commanders on the political part of regiments and units did everything to ensure that in each company, battery were party and Komsomol organizations. In the battles fell many communists and Komsomol members. In place of those who dropped out stood up soldiers who distinguished themselves in the battles, burning desire to go into battle as communists and Komsomol members, as well as through the transfer of communists from the rear units in formation. I asked to be accepted into the party. I want to go into battle as a communist, wrote the fighters, wanting to forever link their fate with the party. These words I, the chief of political department, had to read many times, not only when we chased the fascists, successfully attacked, but also in 1941 and 1942. Here are some figures of the growth of the party ranks of the division. In May, 120 people were accepted as party members and candidates. In June, 142. In July, 152. In October, 125 people. In 1940, and May, 126, June of 162, July, 122, October, 115. So every day and month the party ranks grew. All meetings of party bureaus of regiments, and the party commission at the political department on admission to the ranks of the party, as well as the awarding of party and Komsomol tickets were held on the front line. I would like to say a special word about the communists of the company link, where the foundation of success in battle is laid. Company and battery communists. It is difficult to overestimate their role in combat and in the life of military collectives. They were truly permanent fighters of the front line. They had great opportunities to influence the soldiers and through them on the state of affairs in the unit. After all, they are always together with the soldiers in the trench, in the dugout, in the attack, in the defense, have the opportunity to observe the actions of the soldier in a variety of conditions, to influence him, thereby helping the commander to fulfill the combat task. So continuity of party political work was also ensured by the fact that the retired party leaders, Komsorg and deputy commanders on political part, were promptly replaced by new ones. For this purpose, before the battle, the political department drew up a plan for the relocation of party political workers. The political department created a reserve for this purpose. At the political department constantly worked 2-3-month courses to train party leaders of companies, battalions. Only in January 1944, 51 people passed through the courses. All of them were sent to work as partisans of battalions and companies. Most of them justified themselves in their work. Thus, the Partagues of companies Kusnotinov, Simchikin, Matveyev, Nemchinov, Muraviev, and others acted well. In the offensive battle, political workers, party and Komsomol activists paid great attention to increasing the vigilance of the personnel, especially in the liberated territory. By examples and facts, they explained to the soldiers that in order to undermine the combat effectiveness of the Soviet army, the enemy widely used mines of escape routes, buildings and objects, left poisoned food, wells. Practice has shown that only those political workers who are well prepared in military terms successfully solve the issues of political support of the battle, inspire, awaken courage, bravery, heroism, desire for decisive action in the fight against the enemy. Political department, to improve the military qualifications of political officers, organized training deputy commanders for political party leaders, comsorg of regiments and battalions, took credits for military disciplines, knowledge of military regulations, which allowed them to better understand the situation in the battle, much better to conduct party political work in various types of combat. To give the soldiers more confidence in the strength of their weapons, we often held evenings on the eve of the offensive battle meetings of soldiers of different branches of the troops, infantrymen with artillerymen and tankers. These meetings were carefully prepared in advance. At them the soldiers shared their plans for the battle, agreed on cooperation in case of enemy counterattacks. Such meetings further strengthened the front friendship, military brotherhood, a sense of elbow of like-minded soldiers. In addition, the political department published a leaflet memo to the fighter in the offensive. In the units were issued wall newspapers and combat leaflets in which experienced soldiers gave advice on how to act in the attack. The work done positively affected the battle. We suffered fewer losses, successfully accomplished combat tasks. A big role in increasing the offensive impulse of soldiers played the press. The Central Army Division newspaper in defense of the motherland and other printed organs explained the goals and objectives of the war, revealed the sources of Soviet patriotism, told about the atrocities of the fascist army, educated soldiers in the spirit of hatred of the enemy and love for the motherland, promoted military skill and heroism of soldiers and Soviet people in the rear. In preparation for the offensive, we constantly organized loud readings of newspaper materials. This raised the morale of soldiers, helped to successfully beat the enemy, to crack the enemy defenses. Our division taught the soldiers to act suddenly, having broken into a settlement, not to move openly through the streets, because the enemy keeps them under the crosshairs, to break into the house in two. You and a grenade in front, you behind it. Taught how to hit the German tank Tiger. In addition to this issue lightning combat leaflets dedicated to the exploits of individual soldiers. During the war, the editorial staff of the newspaper in defense of the motherland issued 612 issues with a total circulation of 743,000 copies, 20 leaflets dedicated to the exploits of soldiers. In its pages, 2342 authors spoke, 2511 military letters were published, the authors of which were 1255 soldiers and sergeants, 1176 officers. More than 7,000 combat leaflets were issued in the units. The staff of the editorial office and printing house of the division newspaper experienced all the hardships of the war. Sometimes the editorial office could hardly keep up with the division. Just when the printing house would turn around, the command would come again. Night to the cars, and the newspaper must be printed. All the soldiers are interested in how the fronts are advancing, what is being done in the homeland, how the Allies are moving with the second front. From Kalinin to Prague, the printer Fyodor Alexandrovich travelled from Kalinin to Prague on a 3-tonker or on a steam wagon with his typewriter, and every night a fresh newspaper rustled under his hands. The workers of the editorial office and printing house honestly, conscientiously, courageously fulfilled their military and party duty, showed endurance, bravery, not sparing their strength, blood and life. The secretary of the editorial office, political officer Alexei Petrovich Panfilov, literary worker Lieutenant Sergei Kitchap, Deputy Editor Senior Lieutenant Yerilov were killed in the battles. Some were wounded. All workers of the editorial office and printing house were awarded orders and medals. The editors of the newspaper in defense of the motherland at different times work. Political Officer A. Zafirov, a former employee of TASS in the Urals. Major Stepan Nikolaevich Bakarev, former editor of the Kamishlovsky city newspaper. Captain Panteleimon Vasilievich Yurev, an officer of the political department of the army. The secretary of the editorial office till the end of the war was Senior Lieutenant Mikhail Andreevich Sazonov, the chief of the printing house. He was a printer, Petty Officer Fedor Alexandrovich Nestorov. Scribes Private Anatoly Nikolaevich Klimov, Senior Sergeant Boris Vasilievich Belyaev. A great place in the party political work was occupied by cinema. Films were shown in units, subdivisions, often on the front line. All this was organized by the permanent head of the club, Captain Yegor Pantelevich Shevchenko, film mechanic Garold Ernestovich Howard, film and radio mechanic Captain Mikhail Vasilievich Sinkin. Movies instilled in the soldiers the will to victory, awakened patriotism, courage, bravery, heroism. At the front for moral rest were necessary for movie comedies. Warriors, looking at the screen, heartily laughed. This relieved them of tension at least for a few minutes, made them forget the hardships of war. Agitation and propaganda. Educational work in the division was carried out not only by divisional, regimental, or battalion political party workers, communists and Komsomol members, but we were helped by frontline, army political workers. Major writers visited us. Ilya Ehrenberg visited the division. Artists of Moscow theatres came. Concerts were held near the front line. Their repertoire always had a clear direction. They were Soviet patriotic songs, stories, poems of Soviet and Russian poets, fragments from plays. They spiritually enriched the soldiers, strengthened their faith in victory. Actively worked in our artistic amateur performances of the division and regiment's medical unit. Toilers of factories and fields came to us and talked to the soldiers whose help we always felt, receiving arms, ammunition, food. The party tied together all the people, and they lived with common concerns, a common goal to defeat the enemy. We constantly received letters and gifts from the inhabitants of towns and villages, which the division liberated. State electives of workers and employees of factories, collective farms, educational institutions wrote to us. Soldiers wrote from the front to the rear, the political department of the division. Workers of the rear wrote that they undertook to give more weapons, ammunition, products to the front. In turn, the soldiers of the division swore to mercilessly exterminate Hitlerites, multiplying the revenge account, swore to fight until the complete defeat of fascism and return home with victory. Here are excerpts from some letters. In one battle, Lieutenant Nikola Nazarov distinguished himself for what he was awarded the Order of Red Star. With joy, he informed his teacher Evgenia Andreevna Syriakova about it. Nikolai swore to her to fight even more fiercely. Soon he received a reply. Evgenia Andreevna wrote, "Hello, courier, I congratulate you, my dear, with a government award. Infinitely glad for your fighting deeds. I apply all my knowledge and strength to educate Soviet children in the spirit of true patriots of the motherland, hatred for the worst enemies, fascist beasts. Don't worry about us. We step together with you. Always with you." A letter from the residents of Kharkov. To the soldiers, officers, and generals of the 375th Kharkov Rifle Division. Your blood sanctified the land of our native Kharkov. Your self-sacrificing feats returned our freedom, life, and honor. Glory to you, eagles of the Soviet land. Glory to you, our liberators and defenders. In your hearts, love for your native people and hatred for the enemy. In your hands, a formidable and powerful weapon. The sun of victory illuminates the steel of your bayonets, the muzzles of your guns, the armor of your tanks. Mercilessly and accurately smash the enemy in the future. Let the German executioners answer with rivers of their black blood for the innocent blood of the Soviet people tortured by them, for the ruins of our city, for the ashes of our villages. In the history of mankind, there were no executioners more cruel than Hitlerites. It was they who burned our beautiful city. They robbed, took everything they could to their Germany. Factory equipment, streetcar wires, furniture from apartments, valuables of museums. They tortured thousands of Kharkov citizens. They shot, hanged, burnt young men and women in the Gestapo walls. They seized our women and men and took them to Germany as slaves to hard labor. We will give all our strength to help the Red Army. We will spare nothing for the cause of the final defeat of the brutalized fascist hordes. Greetings to fighters and officers from Kharkov girls students. We are writing to you girls students of Kharkov Industrial Technical School of Labor Reserves. We know that your part together with others liberated our Kharkov, in which we now, having all conditions, study and get education. We thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Your exploits inspire us students to excellent studies. We wish you, dear comrades, a speedy victory over the vicious fascism. Be healthy and happy. With a warm Komsomol greeting, Kovalenko Sonia, Nadipkaya Nadezhda, Liberman Maria, and others, 22 signatures in all. The liaison officer Alexander Stenin wrote to his wife in Savdlovsk. Got the opportunity to beat the fascists. I will take revenge on them. I personally saw orphaned children, women crushed by tanks, old men burned alive. I will kill the German rapists, and only with victory I will return home. Stenin stayed true to his oath. He eliminated malfunctions in the apparatus, spliced wires broken by shells under enemy fire, quickly and clearly carried out all orders of the commander. His communications were always in good working order. He crawled several times a day to the places of breaks. In winter his stiffened hands were hard to obey, but he did his job, connected the ends of the wire, provided communication to the commander. Many towns and villages passed the signalman Alexander Stenin with a coil on his shoulders. And how many kilometers passed abroad. His chest was decorated with 3 state awards. In the evening, the letter carrier brought Stenin a letter from the homeland. He read it and thought about it. He remembered his native places, the Urals, all the way through the war. Looking at the map, Sergeant Stenin said, "It's not so far to Berlin. We will definitely reach." He is far from his homeland, but he knows that the road home lies only through Berlin. From the bottom of my heart, I would like to give you, frontline soldiers, a collective farm greeting and tell you about our deeds in the rear. I work as a chairman of a collective farm. Our collective farmers work hard, put all their strength to give the front more agricultural products. In the past year, our collective farm finished bread harvesting, threshing and bread delivery 83 days earlier, sowed over 1,000 hectares of winter crops. Our request to you, dear soldiers, smash the German fascists, these despicable invaders, and return home with victory. I'm proud of you, your military deeds. My son Ivan Lashmanov, who is in your unit and was awarded 2 medals for bravery. I wish everyone new combat successes and military happiness. G.K. Lashmanov, chairman of the collective farm Bolshevik Tetushensky district, Tasa. To the company commander Nikiforov and his deputy Grashenko received a letter from the parents of the soldier Pantelei Sadovsky. We, the father and mother of Pantelei Petrovich Sadovsky, thank the command for the letter, which describes the feat of our son. We, his parents, wish your entire unit to successfully beat the hated enemy. We wish all fighters to be as strong as hardened steel. Peter Sadovsky, Anna Kalenikova. A lot of grief, anguish, and sufferings have known people of Moldavia. German and Romanian invaders, who treacherously invaded the Soviet Moldavia, flooded its lands with streams of blood and tears, trampled blossoming gardens and vineyards, burned fruitful fields, turned towns and villages into ruins. But the Moldavian people did not kneel before the hated enemy. Soldiers destroy fascist invaders, robbers, rapists. Secretary of the Central Committee I. Salagov, Chairman of the Council of People's Commissars E. Konstantinov, Chairman of the Supreme Soviet I. Brought the flow of letters from the front to the rear and back from the rear to the front increased every day. Till political workers, agitators skillfully used them to increase the offensive impulse of soldiers, to educate hatred of fascist invaders, robbers, infanticide, to instill in soldiers love for the fatherland. These letters were read in units, in dugouts, trenches, in front of the ranks. They gave their positive results in battle. In 1944, when the territory of the Soviet Union was cleared of invaders and the fighting was transferred beyond the borders of the country, the education of new recruits called up from the areas liberated from occupation became especially acute. In addition, with the beginning of the liberation of European countries, special attention was paid to the education of soldiers of the division in the spirit of internationalism, explaining to the soldiers the policy of the Soviet Union in relation to the liberated countries. The goals of the Soviet Army's entry into the territory of this or that country were explained. It was said about the humane treatment of the civilian population. At the final stage of the war in party political work, the fight against manifestations of complacency, carelessness, and weakening of vigilance became important. The question arose of the need to continuously improve the fighting skills of soldiers, to strengthen the discipline and morale of soldiers, to maintain a high offensive impact. High ideal, passionate and truthful our party agitation inspired the soldiers, called them to exploits. So the party political work covered all links of the military organism with the party influence. It was closely linked to specific combat tasks, contributed to the growth of political consciousness of soldiers, their military skill, mass heroism. In the third period of the war, party political work was carried out under the slogan "Defeat the fascist invaders in their own lair," to free the peoples of Europe from fascism. In modern combat under conditions of possible use of nuclear weapons by the enemy, the importance of morale of soldiers, their conviction in the righteousness of their cause, cohesion, mutual assistance, friendship, discipline, and fortitude will undoubtedly become even higher. This places high demands on political and educational work to ensure any battle. It is impossible in a short story to tell about all forms and methods of the gigantic party political work carried out during the years of war in the division. I wrote only about a small part of it. I did not write about the negative facts, about the underestimation of the importance and role of political educational work by individual commanders. If I touched on this issue, I will give some examples. The main part of the command staff in the division well and deeply understood the importance of political and educational work among the personnel and the role of the moral factor in solving combat tasks. They took an active part in conducting political educational work. At the same time, it is bitter to note that among the command staff were accidentally got to high positions rude and soldierophobes. One example is preserved in my front notebook. In July 1944, the commander of the 932nd Artillery Regiment, Lieutenant Colonel Mikhail Efimovich Zanger, a communist since 1943, came to the 7th Battery of his regiment. The communist officer, standing at attention, reported, "Comrade Lieutenant Colonel, the battery is having a political training. The lesson is conducted by me, Senior Lieutenant Karitonov." Zanger, instead of saying hello to the soldiers and the head of the class, shouted in the mat, "You are not a political worker, but a line commander, less engaged in Allyluishina, more business." July 13, at a meeting of officers of the regiment, he said, "You do a lot of meetings, briefings, conversations. Stop all that." Singer was in constant conflict with his deputy on political part and the part Turgome of the regiment. In October, he was relieved of command of the regiment. Another example. Deputy Commander of the 53rd Army, Major General Tarasov, when he was in the 1,243rd Rifle Regiment, went into the 4th Formation Company. Hunting Commander reported to him, "Comrade Major General, the company is studying the material part of weapons. 3 men are at the seminar of editors of combat leaflets." Tarasov rudely interrupted him and said, "No seminars. If you let anyone else go to any seminars, I'll beat your face and send you to the punishment company." And he hit the company commander several times with a stick he always carried with him, and added, "That's for the seminar." But were only Singer and Tarasov like that? Unfortunately, there were many such oafs and rude men in the army ranks, some of whom I met more than once in the 53rd Army. Of course, a commander must be demanding and strict, but demanding has nothing to do with rudeness and boorishness. Irritation and insulting tone never gave good results. An intelligent, well-mannered commander chief will not lose his sense of proportion, will not flaunt his official and personal superiority. He treats his subordinates with respect. When a commander-chief pokes his subordinates, it is humiliating. From such subordinates try to stay away. Swaggering tone, rudeness leads to loss of respect and authority among subordinates. The main figure of agitation and mass work were staff and non-staff propagandists and agitators. Agitator, communist Komsomolets, was respected by all people. He went ahead in the attack, and in the moments of calm was always in the circle of fighters. He told about the distinguished soldiers, read letters received from the rear, told about the situation on other fronts, and did not avoid the question that worried all the soldiers. When will the second front be opened? I, too, during almost every speech before the soldiers, had to hear this question. For 3 years, the ruling circles of the United States and England delayed the fulfillment of their Allied obligation and landed in France only when it became clear that the Soviet Union is able to defeat the Nazi army alone and force the surrender of Hitler's state. However, the opening of the Second Front, which we had expected in 1942-1943, now we were not relieved. The Germans' also large forces resisted us. The fighters, though, asked a legitimate question about the Second Front, but they counted on their own forces in the fight against the Nazis. Political department and party organizations of the division raised 100 passionate agitators. With their help, we carried out in units a great work on moral, psychological, political education of soldiers. Their fiery words and personal selflessness, bravery in battle were a powerful lever for rallying the Red Army masses, the relentless rise of the offensive impulse. Warriors agitators, tirelessly, skillfully working in departments, platoons and companies under the guidance of deputy commanders for political party and Komsomol organizations, made remarkable, heroic deeds. In his May Day Order No. 70, the Supreme Commander-in-Chief wrote, "Our tasks cannot be limited to expelling enemy troops from the confines of our homeland. German troops now resemble a wounded beast, which is forced to crawl away to the borders of its Germany in order to heal its wounds. But a wounded beast that has gone to its den does not cease to be a dangerous beast. To save our country and the countries allied with us from the danger of enslavement, it is necessary to pursue the wounded German beast on its heels and finish it off in its own den. During the battle, to find an opportunity to communicate with the soldiers, to bring to everyone the content of the order of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, to ignite in their hearts the flame of holy hatred of the enemy. Great and mighty power has a truthful word agitator, beautifully expressed the role of the word Vladimir Mayakovsky, writing, words E, the commander of human strength. Especially great is the role of the agitator in the period of offensive battle. Passionate and exciting word unites the soldiers, instills in them vigor and confidence in their abilities. Continuity. One of the essential conditions for good propaganda work during the battle. In ensuring its great role is played by grassroots agitators who are constantly in the fighting order. It is only necessary to lead them in a timely and regular manner, to target them on this great deed in regiments and battalions were led by deputy commanders for political party leaders and agitators of rifle regiments. You can't tell about everything. You can't name all agitators propagandists. You can write a lot about each of them. I will limit myself only to a few lines about the agitator of the 1245th Rifle Regiment, Captain Morozov, and name some grassroots agitators. With Evgeny Mikhailovich Morozov, we were the same age. Before the war, he worked as a director of a secondary school in Sverdlovsk. He was a very calm, unhurried, and judicious man. When he was in units, he didn't go on the attack, but his presence on the front line was extremely useful. He influenced the soldiers with his behavior, steadfastness, optimism. In any case, he put all his soul, talent, organizer, and propagandist. Captain Morozov spent most of his time in battalions, companies, platoons. At the command post or at the regimental headquarters, he appeared only at the call of the regiment's deputy politician, to compile political reports to the chief of the political department, to conduct regimental events, or to discuss issues related to the upcoming battles. Being in the units, he sought first of all to ensure a high moral and political state of soldiers and commanders, doing what depends on the success of the fulfillment of orders of the command. In his field of vision was the food of personnel and the state of weapons, and the organization of political work in companies, platoons, departments. In moments of calm, usually at night, Morozov gathered grassroots agitators in one or the other battalion or companies and instructed them. So the captain told them in detail about the tasks that were to be performed by the soldiers, advised them how to build agitation work, on what first of all to draw the attention of soldiers. He told about everything significant that today was happening in the country, on the battlefield, i.e. attracting everything that can inspire and raise confidence in victory. Speaking about the forms and methods of work agitator, Morozov emphasized the importance of helping his commander in the education of friendship and camaraderie. Evgeny Mikhailovich, along with personal work with agitators, led them and through the commanders of companies and platoons. He steadily achieved efficiency, effectiveness, and continuity of agitation in the course of the battle. At his briefing before the night battle for Novogrigorievka were present Andrei Ivanov, Murat Aliev, Sergei Goncharov, and agitator Ivanov. When he returned to his squad, told the soldiers about the order of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief and how the machine gun crew of the 1243rd Rifle Regiment of Sergeant Arshinov came in the flank of the counter-attacking Germans, opened fire and thwarted their counterattack. When two fascists crawled out of the enemy tank hit by the artilleryman, Arshinov killed them with machine gun fire. For initiative and heroism, he was awarded the order. Lying in the chain, agitator Goncharov passed a note, where he wrote, "Today for Novogrigorievka heroically fought Komsomolets Ivan Semenov. He killed 4 fascists with the fire of his machine gun. Ivan is a participant of fights for Kharkov. He was wounded. Beat the fascists as Ivan Semyonov did." Agitator Boris Vasiliev, with a sheet of lightning, transmitted a message about the heroic death of Komsomol member Ivan Kuzy. This news caused the fighters a surge of hatred for the enemy and raised their morale. Such fly sheets of glory were often written in the trenches in the moments of a short lull, or on the battlefield by the participants of the battle. Agitators, party leaders, komsorg, political workers, leaflets in the trenches passed from hand to hand, from fighter to fighter. Each company issued special leaflets on forms, which also told about the glorious feats of soldiers. Despite their brevity, the sheets were very eloquent and briefly and clearly described the feat of this or that soldier. For example, the leaflet reads, "Warrior. Today, armored fighter Mustafayev performed a fearless feat. Reflecting the Germans' counterattack, he shot down 2 tanks with a rifle and killed 3 fascists. Glory to 3 times awarded armored gunner Mustafayev, be as brave and fearless in fighting the fascists as Mustafayev." Another leaflet reported, "Today, Red Army man Palchinsky performed a heroic feat. He stealthily approached the fascists' trench, threw grenades at them. Having burst first into the enemy trench, he destroyed 11 Hitlerites. Glory to the brave warrior. Learn from Nalchik how to beat fascists." Agitator Murat Aliyev, before the beginning of the offensive, gathered Uzbek fighters. Read them a leaflet about Palchinsky's feat and said, "Be as brave as Palchinsky. We all love Uzbekistan, our families. The way to Uzbekistan is over there," and pointed westward with his hand. "Through the fire over the corpses of the fascists, we will make our way to our homes, gaining victory." Murat preferred to convince his fellow countrymen by personal example. Ahead was a height where the Nazis were defending. It had to be taken. Aliyev was the first to attack and dragged his fellow countrymen after him. The platoon was pressed to the ground by enemy fire on the approaches to the height. "To delay here means to perish," shouted Aliyev, and rushed forward with the cry "Hurrah!" Everyone came up after him, and the platoon gained the height. Aliyev noticed that 3 Hitlerites attacked the wounded Polyakov. He killed 2 fascists. The 3rd Hitlerite raised the buttstock over Aliyev's head and wanted to hit him from behind, but the Ukrainian Komenko killed this fascist with fire. The division newspaper in defense of the motherland wrote about this feat of the agitator. Feats of soldiers of the division were systematically popularized on its pages. Materials about many heroes were accompanied by special clichés, portraits carved on linoleum. Specialist in this part were Sergeant Samailov and the literary staff of the newspaper Sergeant Kachai. Before the war, he worked at the factory Krumpik in the city of Povarolsk, Slavyansk region. About the heroes and their deeds held conversations, rallies. The warriors who distinguished themselves in the battles were thanked before the formation. Letters were sent to their relatives. Orders to award heroes were read out in front of the formation. Notes and posthumous letters found in the pockets of dead soldiers. Letters from the rear about Nazi atrocities. Facts about Hitlerite atrocities in the liberated territories were used in the education of hatred and a sense of revenge against fascists. In the matter of raising the high offensive impulse and mobilization of soldiers to perform combat tasks, played a significant role in the political department club, the head of which was Captain Yegor Shevchenko. Divisional club, in addition to the demonstration of films in regiments and battalions, organized collective listening to radio broadcasts. The club organized concerts where amateur artists popularized the heroes and their exploits through numerous ditties composed by themselves. One of these ditties accidentally survived in my possession. Here it is in a shortened form, although not very perfect in literary terms. But the soldiers loved them. It is about our heroes. Let's sit down, boys, at the edge of the forest. Let's have a cigar. Meanwhile, we'll sing our ditties. We'll sing our ditties for fun. the highest military award, awarded to Daniel Pritkov. He gambled without mercy. He beat and maimed the Prussians. How to bring death down on a German 200 times gave us an example. Our sniper Ivan Nemushin is a great sniper officer. Where Karabayev is with his gun, don't ever be an enemy. In Sumasai's chest, the Order of the Red Star. We're working smart. Our fire cuts down the enemy. To Automacha Orlov. Alexei, our honor. Kalyushin gave the Krauts the heat. He killed 100 bastards. He and Maximko on for their native frontiers. Soldiers often sigh. Narifimov is a guy. When he goes on a reconnaissance mission, he'll bring back a tongue. And for Nikolai Kush, there's no obstacle in battle either. We wish the infantryman a bow full of awards. We are rich in heroes, from the first days and up to now. Our brave Inzhivatov is a wonderful sapper. From Ivan Lashmanov, the fascist had a lot of troubles, tirelessly in the thick of battle. Our famous radio operator. It's become our habit now to gut the German bastard. If you can hit well, all weapons are good. We have at the ready a bayonet, a grenade, a machine gun. We can fight in battle to give the fascist checkmate. With our fearsome machine gun, we fearlessly go into battle. With the support of the mortar, it's not the first time we've beaten a German. If we're on the firing line, if we stand on the firing line, our field guns, they exist to win. Following the attackers, you can't win a battle without a strong mobile rear. Uninterrupted work of the rear contributed to the overall success of the battle. Rear units of the division, no matter how the situation, always tried to provide everything necessary for each soldier. After all, it is necessary to organize food for the soldiers every day, and 3 times a day directly in the fighting order, often during the battle and under enemy fire. Therefore, there was often a situation when it was impossible to deliver food in time to the soldier leading the battle. For such cases, a soldier must have an inviolable reserve, NZ. To fight, you need a sufficient amount of ammunition, shells, mines. For a soldier to fight well, he must be well dressed and footwear. If after a hot battle someone would need to clean his uniform and shoes, it had to be provided. Consequently, each unit should have a workshop for repairing clothing, a shop of a military store. Food, ammunition had to be delivered in time. For this purpose, we needed a serviceable transportation, fuel and lubricants for vehicles, fodder for horses. The war means numerous wounded. It is necessary to render them timely medical aid, which requires medical equipment, dressing materials and medicines. Soldiers and officers timely washed in the bath and received clean underwear. Outer clothing was disinfected. This required precise work of the bath and laundry unit. The rear is a truly immense sphere of action on the relentless care of soldiers. From the level of provision of units and subdivisions with everything necessary for combat depends on the successful solution of combat tasks. The role of the rear in the defeat of the fascist invaders is difficult to overestimate. All this imposed great responsibility, required courage, bravery, determination, organizational skills from everyone, starting from the cook and petty officer of the company, battery to the deputy commander of the division for logistics, who fully committed himself to the cause of supplying the division with everything necessary for victory. He came to division commander for logistics during the war years, Major Stepan Fedorovich Sumasenko, Lieutenant Colonel Mikhail Grigorievich Shubin, Major Nikolai Alexandrovich Polygalov. It was on their work in no small measure depended fruitful activity of all links of rear services. The success of the work of rear units was greatly facilitated by constant attention to the issues of logistics, support of the battle on the part of the division commander, commanders of regiments, battalions, all staffs, political department, deputy commanders on political part. Major Mukhaim Akhtamyanovich Akhmetsyanov worked as an instructor of the political department on the rear for almost 3 years. The chief of medical service of the division for the last 3 years was Major Vasily Vasilevich Sheludev. Major Polygalov, since the formation of the division, passed all stages of economic work. starting from the commander of the economic platoon of the battalion to the deputy commander of the division for logistics. He fully mastered the art of economic management and knew the intricacies of this service. His remarkable organizational skills allowed him to ensure the combat operations of the division in difficult combat condition. He was able to keep his composure and energy in the most difficult days. After the war, Reserve Colonel Nikolai Alexandrovich Polygalov held senior positions in large supply organizations in Sverdlovsk. He took an active part in military patriotic work, was deputy chairman of the Presidium of the Council of Veterans of the 375th Ural Rifle Division. Soldiers, sergeants and officers of the economic service showed wonders of bravery, courage behind each of them are bright military feats. Once after dressing came out of a large dressing room of the infirmary soldier Ivan Sidorov and noticed that came up a semi-truck. A petty officer jumped out of the cab, ran to the emergency room. He came back with orderlies and stretchers. Some woman was carefully unloaded from the back of the truck. Soldier Sidorov approached the driver and asked, "Who is she? Where from?" "From the PA," he answered the driver. "They put her there for me." "And what is this thing? PA?" Ivan was surprised. "You infantry," replied the chauffeur with a grin. "Do they bring you loaves of bread from Moscow? This is a field bakery. It's called Pakom." "What's wrong with her? Wounded?" The chauffeur was fed up with the soldier's questions. He spit through the cab door and muttered, "Well, why are you bothering? I don't know myself who she is and what's wrong with her." To the warehouse of the divisional bakery are continuously approaching the wagons, cars. Bread is sent to the units and subdivisions. And how much does it mean for a soldier, fragrant bread? It is not only calories and strength, it is a living reminder of the bread field, of home, of all that he protects. Puffy browned loaves turn out at the baker Boris Danilovich Lugansky. A lot depends on the head of the bakery, Senior Lieutenant Nikolai Ivanovich Popov, a warm-hearted, charming man, brave, courageous warrior, a specialist in baking. He always tried to make sure that the bakery kept up with the advancing units. On October 27, 1944, the Germans counterattacked our units with large forces. Fierce fighting ensued. In spite of heavy losses, the enemy was trying to connect with its grouping in the eastern part of Hungary, and he managed to squeeze our units and occupy several settlements that we had just liberated, including the town of Piriam. On the left flank, the Germans entered the area of rear units of the division, where our field bakery was located. The head of the bakery, Senior Lieutenant Popov, with his bakers and auxiliary fighters, organized together with the retreating unit's defense of the bakery. The personnel, fighting with superior enemy forces, showed exceptional courage and perseverance. Lieutenant Commander of the 2nd Rifle Company of the 1243rd Rifle Regiment, Junior Lieutenant Mikhail Grigorievich Lavrenkov from the anti-tank gun hit 2 tanks. Red Army men of the separate fighter anti-tank division Ivan Mifodevich Lutsenko, David Vasilievich Moskolenko, Peter Dmitrievich Zatovsky shot down 1 tank each. A lot of enemy manpower was destroyed. Shirking the enemy attacks, in hand-to-hand combat died the head of the bakery, Senior Lieutenant Nikolai Ivanovich Popov. A man of great soul, sensitive to people, a brave warrior, died a brave death for the motherland. He defended the bakery, keeping up with the attackers. At the cost of his own life, some bakers and soldiers also fell. On the western bank of the Morava River fought soldiers of the 1241st Rifle Regiment. The Germans counterattacked in large forces. The ammunition in the regiment was running out. Ivan Marchenko, a petty officer of the 6th Rifle Company, crossed the river 3 times in one day under the enemy fire and delivered ammunition to the company and hot food, soup, goulash, tea. When the Germans went into another counterattack, petty officer Ivan Yakovlevich together with the men of the company repelled the counterattack. The company repulsed 5 counterattacks. Marchenko laid down many fascists with a machine gun, and one of them was strangled in a hand-to-hand fight. The enemy leaked on the right flank of the company. An enemy mine put out of action a machine gun. Petty officer Ivan Yakovlevich Marchenko, under the enemy's fire, got to the machine gun, lay down and began to crush the counter-attacking fascists. The counter-attack was repulsed. Semyon Yermakov, the cook of the 1st Battalion of the 1241st Infantry Regiment, under enemy fire, crossed the Dnieper River 3 times during the day and delivered hot food to the company in thermoses. strengths together with soldiers of the company participated in reflection of counterattacks of enemy soldiers. Many of them were killed with a machine gun. By order of the commander, the division, having made a march through cities and villages of Czechoslovakia, concentrated in the town of Štehove on the river Vltava in 32 kilometers from Prague. From Kalinin and Rzhev, through the Arc of Fire and the Dnieper, the war brought the 375th to Prague. We defeated a strong enemy. The Vltava River, in its peaceful banks, waves splash quietly. She, the beauty, carries its waters majestically and calmly. The personnel of the division is resting, sound songs. The soldiers are singing about the dugout, about the nameless height, about the dark night when bullets whistle across the steppe. They sing not with their voices, but with their hearts and souls. Unsolicited tears glisten in the eyes of former soldiers, because it is difficult, impossible to control their feelings, because the memory leads them to those days when not in the song, but in reality there were 4 steps to death, when only 3 out of 18 guys were left, when days and nights our motherland did not close its eyes to withstand, to defeat the enemy. The soldiers were not ashamed of these tears. One day, Anastasia Pavlovna and I decided to visit Prague to see its sights. Our chauffeur, Sergeant Baskalev, drove us along narrow streets where buildings of different epochs were mixed up, where from any elevated part of the city we could see pointed spires, turrets. We saw that some of them had been damaged during the battle. The city spread out in the valley of the Vltava River with its many bridges. On the left bank, on a hill, stood the 1,000-year-old Hrad, the Prague Kremlin. In the area of the old palaces there were many monuments of antiquity. On the right bank of the Vltava River was the National Theatre. We entered the theatre. We were met by the In Russian he briefly told us about the theatre, took us to a large balcony, from where we could see the main square, the town hall and the monument to Jan Hus, the Czech national hero. Together with the administrator of the theatre we took a picture. We drove along Hiberna Street. On the facade of the People's House, there is a bas-relief of Lenin with an inscription in sectioned Russian. Here in January 1912, the Prague Conference of Russian Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, took place. This trip left an indelible, deep impression of Prague. In the photo studio, we took pictures to remember. In June, having made more than 800-kilometer march, the division concentrated in the area of the town of Zarets near Lake Balaton. In September 1945, based on the order of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, among other compounds of the 7th Guards Army, was disbanded and our Ural 375th. The personnel was demobilized. Younger soldiers were transferred to the 81st Guards Rifle Division. The Ural 375th, Kharkov-Bucharest Twice Red Banner Rifle Division, formed in the hard days of September 1941, mainly from the workers of the Sverdlovsk region in the Yalansk military camps near the town of Kamyshlov, passed with heavy fighting 12,000 kilometers, liberated 1,205 villages and hamlets, participated in the liberation of 56 cities, killed more than 100,000 and captured 17,025 soldiers and officers of the enemy, shot down, burned 651, and captured 165 serviceable tanks, shot down 85 and captured 16 serviceable airplanes on the airfields, destroyed 830 guns and mortars, 1805 machine guns, captured 812 and 512 automatic rifles, 805 automobiles and many other military property, weapons, equipment, ammunition. 2 orders of the Red Banner on the banner of the division. The honorary name Kharkov and Bucharest, all regiments were awarded orders testify to the glorious military exploits of the soldiers of the division. 1,241st Bucharest Rifle Regiment, Order of the Red Banner. 1,245th Rifle Regiment, Order of Bogdan Khmelnytsky. 932nd Artillery Regiment, Order of Bogdan Khmelnytsky. For excellent combat actions on taking cities and forcing water obstacles, 18 victory salutes were played in honor of soldiers in Moscow. 19 commendations were announced to the personnel of the division by the Supreme Commander-in-Chief. For heroism, courage and bravery, 28,000 soldiers, sergeants and officers of the division were awarded orders and medals. 9 of them were awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union, and 5 became full Cavaliers of the Order of Glory. The glorious combat path of the Ural Division is a living and vivid example of selfless love and devotion of the soldiers of the division to our beloved motherland, the Soviet people, the government, and the great cause of building a bright future of the fatherland. Many battle friends were missing in our ranks. They laid down their heads on the battlefields for the freedom and independence of the motherland, for the happiness of future generations. The memory of them will forever remain in the hearts of fellow soldiers and all Soviet people. Their names are now carried by streets and schools in different cities of the former Soviet Union. The feat of these heroes will forever remind us of the price at which the Soviet people achieved victory and a free life for the younger generation. That is perhaps all for today. But even now my ears hear the whistle of bullets and bursts of shells and mines, the roar of engines, groans and cries of the wounded. My dear young fighting friends, their young faces stand before my eyes. How many of them I found at the front, and how many I lost in battles, but I will never forget them. The victory banner is soaked in the blood of all the fallen and the living. The eternal flame on Red Square in Moscow bears the brief flashes of all soldiers' lives. For 18 days and nights the soldiers, having made a truly immortal feat, went through many fierce battles and battles to the joyful day of May 9, 1945. Victory was won by our people at the cost of huge sacrifices, deprivations, at the cost of incredible tension of all the forces of the working class, collective farm peasantry, and intelligentsia. The war was the largest armed intervention of the striking forces of world imperialism, one of the most severe trials our motherland has ever experienced. In this war, the fate of mankind was decided. After all, the world could be thrown back to the era of barbarism and the triumph of brute force, for fascism carried with it the terrible ideas of enslavement, the superiority of one people over all others, the idea of exterminating or turning people of other nationalities into the working cattle of the German masters. And if this did not happen, it is the greatest merit of the Soviet people and its armed forces. The Soviet Union was the main force in the defeat of fascism. The Soviet army defended the freedom and independence of the motherland, delivered the peoples of Europe from fascist slavery. The Communist Party was the leader, organizer, and commander of the masses. The personal example, the fiery word of the communists raised people to attacks and labor feats, led to victory. I would like to finish the narration about the exploits of the soldiers of the Ural Division with poems written at the front. Maybe one of the composers will write music to them. You were born in the mountains of the Urals. Here, in a pine forest by the river, shield and sword were forged for you. Bastions of the country, men. Having equipped you, they led you out to stand in the way of the evil foe. And your regiments were on time to help the capital. Same. 375th. Your turn has come. 375th. Forward. Let's go. Forward. You also made it to Kalinin. You went through the swamps at Rachev. And at Kursk, when it boiled over, you were among the first there too. And then there was Kharkov and Dnieper. Bucharest remembers your prowess. The Carpathian ranges did not let you in. You took them in a deadly battle. Saying to a Cheran, 375. Your turn has come. 375th. Let's go. Let's go. Forward. You've conquered the Golden Prague, where the Nazis stood in a wall, and over it Soviet flags flew brightly in the victorious spring. You were there in time to help. How proud the country was of you. On the banners of the regiments rang out your battle orders. Chorus. 375th. Your turn has come. 375th. Forward. Let's go. Forward. How can the Urals not be proud of you? How can the Urals not love you? You're the infantry, the queen of war. You managed to win the victory. All your fighting regiments. All your fighting regiments. No, it's not in vain that they're steel, stray bayonets. They're steel, stray bayonets. Sessions. 375th. Your turn is over. 375th. We'll never die. The years are flying fast and inexorably, like clouds. They bring snow or rain, then they open the sky and let the sun shine. Is it possible to stop the rapid running of months, years, decades? Time cannot be held back. Only memory stops seconds and moments, turning them into eternity. Yes, we are far away from the war, but it is still following us. How many bitter tears are shed by soldiers' widows and mothers, sons and daughters? Grandsons and great-grandsons of soldiers who did not return from the war are crying. They are looking for the graves of their fathers and grandfathers. They want to learn about how their loved ones died. They want to preserve their names, their deeds, their images. 1961. In Sverdlovsk, in the hall of the District House of Officers of the Ural Military District, hung with battle paintings and portraits of military leaders, gathered veterans of the Ural 375th, Kharkov Bucharest Twice Red Banner Rifle Division, my fellow soldiers. Once again, as if it was yesterday, I remember day by day the path of our division, which ran from the small river Pishma to the beautiful Vltava in Czechoslovakia. Memories, memories. Each one has his own, and altogether common. About life and death in the war, about attacks, hand-to-hand combat, about those who were near and those who are gone today. Here, under the portrait of Marshal Voroshilov, are two former soldiers, retired Major Alexander Glazerin, propagandist of the 1245th Rifle Regiment, and Vladimir Kershanin, former commander of the Mortar Company, reserve cap. They are remembering something. Probably about that battle, when under the fire of enemy machine guns infantry lay down, and communist Glazerin rose and with the cry forward, "Hurrah!" for the motherland, rushed to the enemy trenches. After him the soldiers rose, and in a fierce fight overturned the enemy and cleared the village of Bukontovo. In the last seconds, when the enemy had already left the village, enemy machine gun fire severely wounded Alexander Nikolaevich. In several hospitals, doctors fought for his life, and today he came here with difficulty, leaning on a stick to meet his comrades in arms. And maybe they remember about that combat episode, when the positions of the Mortar Company burst into the counter-attacking enemy soldiers, and mortar men in hand-to-hand combat. They were exterminated. The former commander of the Mortar Company, now honorary railway captain of the reserve Kershanin, whose tunic sparkles with orders and medals, including the post-war Order of Lenin, personally killed 3 and one of them strangled with his hands. Kershanin did not know, could not know and could not even assume that day, that having passed along the fiery roads to victory, he would stay alive and in many years would come here to meet his fellow soldiers. At this meeting we created a council of veterans of the division and elected its presidium. I was elected chairman of the presidium. The veterans decided to do their best to immortalize the memory of their comrades in arms killed in battle. The Presidium of the Division Council established contact with more than 400 former soldiers of the division, received from them filled-out questionnaires, which are now kept in the Museum of the Ural Military District, helped to create groups of fellow soldiers in other cities of the Sverdlovsk region, in Moscow and Kharkov. The veterans did not stay away from life. Many worked, and some were awarded orders for their peaceful labor. Vasily Alexeyevich Orlov, the former paramedic of the 932nd Artillery Regiment, graduated from Kiev Medical Institute after the war, worked in the city of Bryansk as head doctor of a polyclinic until his retirement, was awarded the Order of October Revolution, honored doctor of the RSFSR, and continues to work. See Colonel of Medical Service Vitaly Ivanovich Muratov worked for many years as head of the medical unit of the Kiev District Military Hospital. Now retired, taking into account his age, continues to work there as head of the department. He was awarded the Order of the Red Star and the badge Excellent Healthcare, honored doctor of the Ukrainian SES. Former company commander Lieutenant Nikolai Andreevich Safronov, candidate of philosophical sciences, worked as head of the department at the Belarusian Polytechnic Institute. Many veterans actively worked and work on a voluntary basis, conduct a great military patriotic work among young people at enterprises, institutes, colleges, among soldiers, conduct lessons of courage in schools, meeting with young people. Veterans try to make them understand and feel how honorable it is to be a defender of the fatherland, so that they do not forget about the heroic military work of their fathers and grandfathers who defended the independence of the motherland, so that they not only keep the military traditions, but also multiply with their labor what was won in battles. For good work on military patriotic education of youth, more than 100 veterans of the division, working and living only in Sverdlovsk, were awarded the Medal for Valorous Labor in commemoration of the 100th anniversary of Lenin's birth. Among them are Fyodor Alexeyevich Medvedev, Semyon Ivanovich Lutsenko, Anastasia Pavlovna Inutdinova, Antonina Alexeyevna Shikova, Alexei Ivanovich Nikonov, and many others. Several dozens of veterans were awarded certificates of merit and badge of honor of the CV, but it is impossible to enumerate all of them. On the initiative, and with the participation of veterans, were held many trips to the places of battles of the division. In 1969, we made a trip by bus under the direction of the director of the local history museum, Alexander Balichugov. I was his deputy. We visited the cities of Kalinin, Staritsa, Rishchev, Belgorod, Stalingrad, villages where the division fought bloody battles. We visited the bank of the Volga near Kalinin, from where, having forced the Volga on December 16, 1941, the division began to storm the quarters of the city of Kalinin, then drove the invaders to the west. We also visited other blood-soaked frontiers near Staritsa and Rachchev. Here I would like to quote some excerpts from the documents of the Military Council of the 30th Army, in which the division fought. The 30th Army was commanded by hero of the Soviet Union Major General Leryushenko. In the material written to the Military Council of the Kalinin Front to consider the submission of the 375th Infantry Division for the title of Guards Division. It's on December 13, 1941 to April 25, 1942. The division with a fight repulsed the enemy and liberated 258 settlements. The enemy was damaged. 1870 fascists were killed, 92 people were taken prisoner. The headquarters of the infantry division and 2 infantry regiments were destroyed. Destroyed 125 dugouts and 38 pillboxes, 359 machine gun points, 1 heavy battery, 11 batteries of 105mm and 75mm guns, 68 mortar batteries, smashed 85 individual guns, 28 mortars, shot down 4 bombers, destroyed 21 NPs, 60 vehicles, 102 wagons with cargo and war material, 4 tanks, 15 tankets, 3 airplanes, 2 regimental banners, 10 machine guns, 334 machine guns, 94 vehicles, 1354 rifles and machine guns, 85 guns, 9 mortars, 167 trucks, 40 cars, 25 special vehicles, 5 staff buses, 28 motorcycles, 92 bicycles, 104 horses, 97 wagons, 4 kitchens, 16 radios, tractor, all-terrain vehicle, a lot of other military property and ammunition equipment, presented to the award of 500 people. Side division throughout its combat operations constituted, as a rule, a strike group of the army, due to which the division's units, having the task of breaking through the enemy's defences, as well as cutting off his escape routes. In most cases, the main forces made a frontal strike on the enemy's resistance nodes, at the same time throwing individual units into the rear of the enemy by bypassing him from the flanks. During December, the division conducted its combat operations mainly along the Staritsa Highway and in the adjacent settlement. Entering the battle on December 16, 1941, the division, which had no combat experience, marked the first day of its offensive by decisively overcoming the fierce resistance of the enemy and defeated him. During the first 2 days of fighting, the division successfully forced the Volga River near the city of Kalinin, repulsed the enemy settlements. Krasnoye, Shulgino, Dushevkino, Danilovskoye, State Farm, Bolshevik, Shalakovo, Dmitrovskoye, Oparino, etc., forced the enemy to retreat 16-20 kilometers from the city of Kalinin. The order of May 8, 1942 says, the 375th Infantry Division, acting as part of the 30th Army, in the fight against the German invaders showed exceptional courage and heroism. The Military Council of the 30th Army especially notes the exceptional merits of all the personnel of the division during the period of particularly intense battles of the army, where the 375th Infantry Division played a leading role and more than once turned the fascist hordes into panic flight. We visited the mass graves where our comrades in arms are buried. We bowed, poured out a handful of Ural earth, and took the blood-soaked earth from these graves for eternal storage. In military committees, we took lists of our comrades in arms buried in mass graves. In 1969, making a trip with us to the places of battles of the division, Yuri Melodin found the grave of his father, a soldier of our division who died in 1942 in the battles near Rezh. A few minutes in silence, kneeling down, Yuri stood at the mass grave where the name of the most dear to him, his father, is carved on the obelisk. What was Yuri Valerianovich thinking about in those moments? Of course, about always being worthy of the glory of the heroes' frontline soldiers, to be like his father was. Yuri Valerianovich Meladin is faithful to his duty, his Talenin citizens. Rozhevtians, Starokhans highly appreciate and deeply honor the memory of the feats of the Ural soldiers of the 375th Infantry Division. Almost in every village and town there are monuments built, which the inhabitants take care of with great warmth. In the center of the city of Kalinin at the monument to Lenin is buried our division commander Major General Nikolai Alexandrovich Sokolov. His name is one of the streets of the city of Rachiev. On the central square of Staritsa, on the obelisk, the names of the regiment commanders Evgeny Fedosevich Rumyantsev and Serafim Vladimirovich Chernovsky are written in gold letters. One of the streets of the city is named after Chernovsky. In many schools, in all military commissaries there are rooms, corners, stands of military glory of soldiers Uralians. In military commissaries there were lists of buried in mass graves. For a long time we stood on heroic frontiers, at dear to us graves of fellow soldiers. It was hard to leave at once. Too many memories came flooding back. Front days, nights, trenches, pillboxes, trenches. Our century was shorter than a bayonet. Love for the motherland was the longest of all roads. On the former front line of defense of the division near Belgorod dug up hand and machine guns, rifles, cartridges, casings, helmets. These relics are now in the Sverdlovsk Museum of Local Law and in the Military History Museum of the Ural Military District. The Sverdlovsk Palace of Pioneers and GP2 No. 66 organized several trips, several times a month, on the initiative and under the guidance of the head of the Kharkov group of fellow soldiers, former Chief of Intelligence Division, retired Major Isaac Lovich Tulchinsky. Young people and school children organized trips to the Kursk Bulge. Many schools, boarding schools, universities of Sverdlovsk and the region organized hikes with the participation of veterans of the division. Such trips to memorable places and emotional, colorful stories of the participants of the campaign on their return, as well as the memories of veterans in front of school children, young workers, students were like dry brushwood thrown into the fire of memory. All this helped to understand, feel more deeply the greatness of the feat at the front and called for the feat at the labor front. The brought exhibits, enriched museums and rooms of military glory were widely used in military patriotic work. They gave an opportunity to feel the connection of time and generations. This is what boys lack today. In the Military Historical Museum of the Ural Military District and in the Kharkov Garrison House of Officers, as well as in the Museum of the History of the Korsun-Shevchenko Battle, in the Museum of the Patriotic War in Kiev, special sections dedicated to the exploits of soldiers of the 375th Infantry Division have been created. In Yelani, the place where the division was formed, at the entrance to the Garrison Club installed a memorial plaque. In the museum of the club widely covered the feat of the soldiers of the division. In the Palace of Pioneers was a room with stands dedicated to the feats of the soldiers of the 375th Infantry Division. School museums, rooms of military glory, corners, stands dedicated to the feats of arms of soldiers of the division, were created with the active participation of veterans of the division, not only in the city of Sverdlovsk, but also in towns and villages, military committees of the Sverdlovsk region, as well as in Kharkov, Belgorod, Poltava, Kursk, Ryshev, Staritsa, and in towns, villages liberated by the division in the country. There were more than 150 of them, which only we knew, with whom we had contact. A very large museum, occupying several rooms and a corridor of the second floor, was located in the 136th School, named after the commander of the 375th Rifle Division, hero of the Soviet Union Peter Dmitrievich Govurenko. Here each class studied combat records of individual units and subdivisions, corresponded with veterans of the division. Veterans from all corners of the former Soviet Union came here every year to celebrate the day of Kharkov liberation, Victory Day. Interesting is the museum at the club The Way of Fathers in School No. 10 of Serov. School children corresponded with veterans of the division, museums of Czechoslovakia, Romania. In the museum there were lessons of courage, specially prepared excursions by guides of senior classes. Museum activists visited the museums of the division in the city of Sverdlovsk. A good museum of military glory of the division in the city of Belgorod in the 19th School, and in many other towns and villages liberated by the division. However, all this is in the past. With bitterness, we have to note that the titanic work of veterans of the division, a huge number of teachers, students, trackers to create museums, rooms of military glory with the beginning of perestroika in the country went in vain. Military patriotic, educational work among young people and schoolchildren was curtailed. Elementary military training was removed from the curricula of schools. Military instructors were dismissed. Museums and rooms of military glory, centers of patriotic education, were closed. With great effort, the decorated stands were thrown away. The collected exhibits were scattered, thrown into the garbage. Meetings of young people, schoolchildren with veterans were stopped. It is regrettable, but out of more than 100 museums dedicated to the exploits of soldiers of the Ural Division, only the 21st Secondary School and Vocational School No. 66 remained in Yekaterinburg. In the 21st Secondary School, there is a room of military glory of soldiers of the 375th Rifle Division, created by the efforts of teachers, pupils, especially by the efforts of the teacher Nadezhda Dmitrievna Sharmaya and the veteran of the division Alexei Fedorovich Medvedev. Decorated stands, documents, photos of veterans and exhibits reflect the heroic deeds of soldiers and the combat path of the division. The albums contain letters and memories of the division soldiers. Excursions are conducted in the room. Specially trained guides are allocated. A good museum in Yekaterinburg Vocational School, No. 66, the work of which is controlled by the director of the school Gennady Kudin and his deputy for educational work, Vyacheslav Serebryakov. Almost all the equipment is made by children's hands. In the glass showcases there are photos, schemes, a lot of finds from the battlefields, collected during trips to the places of battles of the division, things of veterans of the division, uniforms with order bars. On the tables are copies of memories of veterans of the battles. Saving on the education of young people in the spirit of patriotism is now costing the state dearly. Year by year, more and more guys who have no idea about the army service do not know simple things, often unable to understand what the officers want from them. Many with low general education level. Drug addicts, toxic addicts, former criminals who came out of prisons come to the army. They establish their own prison order in the unit's Stadovshchina. After all, in the army before the perestroika period, they had no idea what hazing was. If before perestroika mothers were proud that their sons were serving in the army, now drafted youth and their parents are looking for any possible loopholes to evade military service. The number of evaders is increasing. Conscripted soldiers are deserting the army by the thousands. The situation in the officer corps is even more alarming. Among the officers, there are people who've lost their honor and sense of duty. Thousands of young, full of creative energy officers are leaving the armed forces, and although there are still people devoted to the army, but they work without sufficient material support for the army, on enthusiasm alone, relying only on their own strength, knowledge, and professionalism. Our officials at the top do not want to take into account what the army has done and is doing now. After all, it is only thanks to the army that our sky is still peaceful.
But the time in which we live makes more and more serious demands to the defenders of the motherland. The policy of the US ruling circles and their henchmen is becoming more malicious. American and British airplanes are bombing Iraq.
On March 24-5, 1999, NATO, led by the USA, unleashed military aggression against Yugoslavia. Today they bomb Yugoslavia, and tomorrow they may bomb Russia in principle. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, the US, its allies, do not consider Russia. NATO seeks to get closer to Russia's borders. With the admission of Poland, the Czech Republic, and Hungary to NATO, NATO is already at our borders. This means that from now on, NATO tactical aviation from the territory of Poland will be able to reach major Russian cities. All this insistently dictates the need to improve Russia's security. It is necessary to strengthen the army and navy, to raise the military-industrial complex. They will reckon with us only when we are strong. Only then our calls for peace will be heard by them. We need to keep our gunpowder dry, and it will be dry when the defense shell will be filled with good personnel, prepared morally and physically in military terms. Soldiers and officers will have the latest military equipment in their hands. The motherland believes not only in the filial devotion of soldiers, but also in their diligence, intelligence, ability to quickly grasp all the wisdom of military science. And the government needs to turn its face to the army. For the preservation of peace, against the military threat must be fought today, before the war begins. No for the advocates of violence. The lessons of time do not last. They are still a big and tasty pie walking. In the distance, they're looking at that pie, and with lust. They wonder, what's in it? May the great victory of the Soviet Union in the Patriotic War be a warning to all those who think of a new war.